Okay. Really? I saw her.
Right. No, it's not.
Good morning and welcome to J2, the California, Oregon, Washington Joint Transportation Commission meeting. Today's Wednesday. It's Wednesday? No. Yeah, it is Wednesday. I said it was Tuesday. It's Wednesday, September 13th. I wasn't lying when I said I have no idea what today was. I just want to remind all of you to mute your laptops or your phones and your ringers so that we can be respectful to other people in the room. And if you're with the Oregon delegate, don't forget you need to order your lunch for 11 o'clock for tomorrow, or you will not get any lunch. So, or today, sorry, not tomorrow. You're going to go back to bed. So we need to set a rule for the next meeting that no meeting starts before 10 o'clock. Here, there we go. All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed it last night. I think that we really did get to mingle and get to know each other, and it was really a fun time for all of us. So we've started a new thing, and we're building relationships here, so we look forward to next year. Now the pressure is on California. Okay, you got it. So I'm going to have Rima introduce our next guest. But on the top of our agenda here, we have an item of regenerative transportation ecosystems, the RAY. So
Yeah,
I'll turn it over to you.
it is my honor to introduce Allie Kelly, who is joining us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. Where is she? Oh, there she is. I was looking for her. We are so excited to have her here today. The commission has heard from her at least a couple of times in Washington. She is the executive director of an organization called the RAY, and I'll let her tell you about the name and the background. It's really interesting. But the cool thing is the RAY is essentially 18 miles of highway that in partnership with Georgia DOT, they have created a live test lab to demonstrate all sorts of innovative, both technology and environmental activities that are showing the world really in the United States how we can do better with utilizing our existing assets, our right of way next to the highway that oftentimes cost us to maintain, right? We've got to mow them or we've got to deal with noxious weeds, to actually turn them into productive, useful assets, right? So some of the things they do, and our commission actually was so excited about what Allie has educated us on, that we issued a recommendation for the last 2 years in Washington State to create what's called a regenerative mobility ecosystem. And a lot of our lawmakers go, what are you talking about? And so we have to explain it. But basically what they're doing is creating this ecosystem, thinking about that right away, where they're placing solar panels on the aprons, right? Instead of just grass weeds. They're planting intentional pollinator colonies, so butterflies and bees can grow right there by the highway. And it's beautiful. There's all these beautiful wildflowers as you drive down this highway. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then they're also doing some really cool things to enable technology, AV technology. They've got the smart striping, rubberized asphalt, which is being tested and demonstrated as well for drainage and environmental purposes. They've got a rest area that demonstrates the use of solar placement of panels to power their EV charging at the rest area. And the thing I thought was the coolest when I was there, because I got a tour and I was so honored to get it, was you go behind the rest area and they have an automated tire check station. You don't get out of your car, and for people like me that don't even know how to check their tire pressure, it was great. Because you roll up really slow, and there's this computerized big screen that tells you, is talking to you, like, roll forward slowly. Okay, stop. Then roll forward. And it's measuring your tire pressure, and she probably knows the data, but I was shocked to hear how much over and underinflated tires affect your car's MPG and thus your fossil fuel consumption. And so we sat there, it measured the tires, and then it spits out your reading, and you're at least able to then go to Les Schwab or somewhere and say, hey, here's my tire pressure, can you fix it? But it was amazing. It was free. And it's those kind of services that if the public maybe had available, they might do more than if, I mean, today you can't even get air for free at gas stations. They charge you for it. So there's a lot of cool stuff they're doing, and Allie's going to be here today to talk to you a little bit about that and get you all thinking about the things you can do in your states to also start implementing this kind of methodology with our state highways and right-of-ways. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ellie.
Thank you, Rima. I'm really excited to be here with y'all today, and I just want to start with gratitude. Thank you for including the Ray in your first in-person meeting back from COVID. It was my pleasure to travel to be here with you in person because I feel like in-person discussions, they're not necessarily convenient, but they have a lot of value. And my hope is that you've given me a lot of generous time on the agenda, and I'm hoping that I can not just tell you about what we're doing in Georgia, but what the Ray is helping to do across the country with partners at the local, state, and regional level, and maybe figure out some things that we can do together moving forward. I'm going to drag my own slides, but I want to try to start from the beginning to explain this. I call us an odd duck, which seems like a strange thing to say on the Oregon Ducks campus, but I'm sticking with it. We're an odd duck. We're a 501c3 charity. So we're an NGO, and we're an NGO who lives to build projects. So I think we're probably one of the first in the country, maybe one of the first in the world, of leveraging philanthropy to facilitate projects. We do thought leadership and we do research, and we support and we value thought leadership and we value research. But I'm just going to be honest with you, I don't think we have the luxury of time to not act every single day. If we wake up and we don't do something to act, then we are wasting what precious little time we have left. So this organization isn't really interested in, doing a lot of talking. I'm here talking to you, hoping that it leads to action because we think we need to be acting every day. And we're focused on the transportation sector for a couple different reasons. I'm going to get into our history briefly so you understand how authentic this work is for the Ray. But I want to tell you that, what drives us, no pun intended, is transportation carbon. Your job is very hard, and we know it's hard. It's hard for the engineers within departments of transportation. There's a lot of change going on, a lot of disruption in the sector and the industry. Change is hard for humans, period, full stop. I think change is really hard for engineers. And so, part of what we want to do is to help facilitate and support hard things. How can we make hard things easier to happen? The other thing that's hard about your job is not just the change and disruption, but honestly, transportation carbon, if we're going to talk just about carbon for a minute. Also talk about Vision Zero. We can talk about 44,000 deaths in 1 year, setting a 13-year high. That's hard too. But let's talk about carbon. You can't control the tailpipe. This is non-point source pollution. It's not like the energy sector where energy companies control the tailpipe of a specific number of assets. You have 330 million Americans running around, driving, right? How are we going to control all of those emissions and all of those tailpipes? That's not the American way. We don't make decisions about what people drive and what their commute looks like. A lot of the potential activity that we can see and the potential progress that we can see can be in the fleet market, where you have more consolidation of control over tailpipes with medium and heavy duty vehicles. But we're struggling with passenger EVs, right? I mean, we have independent choice. People choose what they drive based on their economics, based on their own culture where they live, and the charging infrastructure is not simple. I'm telling you that as someone who installed an EV charger in August of 2015. Y'all want to talk about NEVI in 2023? I'm all about it because we did it on the interstate 8 years ago. We started to build out a highway charging network in 2015, and it's hard. The charger on the Ray Highway is down right now. We are not meeting the 95% uptime goal. We're not a part of NEVI, but, just these things are difficult. Uptime is hard. Y'all probably saw what led the news yesterday. Secretary Granholm is making or was making a multi-day EV trek across the southeast. She stopped outside of Augusta, Georgia to charge. Not all of the chargers were working. Her advance team parked an ICE vehicle to save a spot for her to charge where a charger was working. A family with a small child arrived before the secretary and called the sheriff. Okay, Augusta, Georgia, where the golf game is played. Outside of that, the sheriff was called because the chargers weren't working and they were icing out a family with a small child who needed to charge. This is complicated, and it's becoming a part of our cultural dialogue, which makes it more complicated. I'm not here to talk to you about why we shouldn't do things. I'm here to talk to you about why we should redouble our efforts to do these things. And I'm here to tell you from the ground that these things are hard, and y'all have one of the hardest jobs in America right now. And that's why we think philanthropy helps. So I want y'all to walk away from this conversation understanding why we do this work and how we do this work. I don't want there to be questions of, like, I'm not really sure what the Ray is. We're a nonprofit, and we leverage and funnel philanthropy to try to help transportation, mainly DOTs, also local governments, and how do we help support the decisions and the visioning that leaders like yourselves have to be engaging in. You have to stay engaged no matter how complex, complicated, and hard these activities and this planning is. How can we help you stay engaged? How can we help you to see 10 years down the road? How can we help you get 2040 closer to where we are today? And how do we do this with confidence? How do we do this in a way that neutralizes some of the risk? So that's, that is the Ray. And we stand alone in this work at this point. There's a lot of really great organizations that are providing a lot of great analysis and a lot of great thought leadership. I think we're one of the only ones that gets invested in projects. We get financially invested in projects, but we also, I don't know if y'all have noticed, I carry a backpack. We take the project and we put it in our backpack and we hike with the backpack so that people inside DOTs who might change positions, right? They might, over the months or years, go want to do something totally different in the DOT, and then who has the ball on the project? You can know with confidence that the Ray has put the project in our backpack, and we're going to hike it through the valley of death. We're going to hike it through procurement. We're going to hike it through sole source, right? We're going to hike it through to the finish line, despite personnel changes or leadership direction. We're going to keep it in our backpack and we're going to get it across the finish line. Those are the kinds of functions that we think nonprofits are well suited to serve, because I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm going to show you some products that have been provided to the Ray Highway through traditional procurement. Nothing on the Ray Highway was given to us for free. Nothing on the Ray Highway was given as pay to play. We don't receive any nonprofit donations from companies that you'll see on the highway. We are not financially entangled in any of these projects other than just being a part of the buyer network. We have procured these projects with GDOT or with our other partners. And so where we can sit close to your agencies, knowing that we're not going to trigger procurement, knowing that we're not going to sell you anything, knowing that we're only there to support decision-making and analysis as it drives to execution. We can be in that bridge position. Last night at dinner, we talked some about bridges. We need bridges right now. And this is one of the areas we have to figure out how to bridge the public sector to the private sector, how to bridge challenges to solutions. And traditional procurement is not set up very well to create bridges of communication and ideation so that the solutions can get to the problems or the challenges more quickly. That's one of the roles that we try to play at the Ray. We snuggle into the agency, we provide the bridges for the communication, And we can also try to provide through the nonprofit pathways through procurement that are more facilitated so that you don't get stuck in some of these thorny issues like sole source. Any questions? I have 52 slides and we've only now made it through one. So you might want to get some more coffee. That's actually a joke. I'm going to try to move quickly. So I mentioned our DNA and our authenticity. So we're called the Ray because of Ray Anderson. Not a lot of people know about Ray. Some in the back do. So Ray started a carpet company in LaGrange, Georgia in the 1970s. There were like, I don't know, 50,000 people who started carpet companies in Georgia in the 1970s. Like making carpet in Georgia is not really standout. But what Ray did that was standout is he offered a new product to the American market. He came in with a carpet tile. He was the first with Interface to introduce modular flooring to the American market. And if you can think back to the 1980s, which I do a lot because I'm a child of the 80s, you know, in the 1980s, we went into skyscrapers. So we went into multi-floor office layouts with cubicles. So the 80s welcomed shoulder pads, cubicles, a lot of really amazing things that still stay with us to this day. And when you have modular office space with cubicles, the office alignment is changing, and you can't have wall-to-wall carpeting to accommodate a modular and changing office environment. And so when we moved into skyscrapers, we moved into modular flooring to accommodate the modularity and the flexibility of cubicles. I tell you this because as a result, Ray ended up being the CEO of $1 billion business in less than 20 years because he captured the market for modular flooring, and during the 80s it took off. And so in 1994, which is the Clinton era, right? So giant balloon drop at the White House, Fleetwood Mac had a resurgence in popularity. And at the time, in 1994, Ray Anderson, a $1 billion business CEO, now operating around the world in 109 countries, comes out and says Interface is going to zero. He publicly says in 1994, Interface is going zero carbon. We're going to have zero carbon emissions. Now, 1994 was the year that Aquanet became indicted for maybe causing the hole in the ozone layer, along with a lot of other aerosols. So we were worried about the ozone layer, but nobody was talking about carbon, certainly not like we do today. He was the first to set a zero carbon goal. He also set a zero waste to landfill goal. For a carpet company, this is insane. For a carpet company that makes modular tiles that they cut out of big sheets of carpet, this is really insane. So that was the real second career of Ray Anderson, and that's what people who know him don't remember him for introducing modular carpet tiles to the American market. People remember him for being the father of sustainability in the corporate world and for being the pioneer of circularity. We were not involved in circular economy prior to 1994 with Ray Anderson putting the flag in the ground that, damn it, he was going to zero. So Ray, being the Georgia boy, when he passed away in 2011, the state government, our state legislature and our governor wanted to honor him with a memorial highway. And they decided to name 18 miles of West Georgia's Interstate 85. So Auburn, Tuscaloosa, here's the state line. There's the West Point Reservoir. This is the Chattahoochee River, the most litigated river in American history. We've been sued for over 30 years by Florida and Alabama over that river. This is where we start with the Ray Highway. Just to give you a sense of how rural this is, West Point is population 8,000. That population hasn't really changed in forever. And then LaGrange, Georgia, which is where Interface was born. So Ray was born in West Point. Interface was born in LaGrange, Georgia, population 35,000. And this is the 18-mile corridor that the state government decided to rename as the Ray C. Anderson Memorial Highway, connecting the birthplace of Ray, the man, and Interface, the movement that led to corporate sustainability and circularity. Ray has two surviving daughters. His youngest daughter, Harriet, is the one who worked with our former governor, Nathan Deal, to make the highway naming happen. She still lives in the family home in LaGrange. And she drove on what would become her father's Memorial Highway on her way back from the state capitol in April of 2014. And as she's driving, much like her dad, she had an epiphany. She realized, I've just put my dad's name on what she called a damn dirty highway. The greenest industrialist of the century is what Forbes magazine and Time magazine had called her dad. And she's looking around her at tailpipe emissions, dead deer carcasses, rolled up scrap tires, which we call gators in the South. She's looking at the state of mowing the grass on the roadsides every 8 weeks and the costs associated with that. And literally, as she's driving the 90 minutes to get home, she has worked herself into a panic that she has just attached one of the greatest legacies for sustainability and the balance of profit and planet. Her dad's legacy, she's just put it on a dirty highway. That was the beginning of the Ray. I was the first phone call that Harriet made when she got home. And together we have built this nonprofit organization. I'll be honest with you, at first we were just trying to green up this highway. It was hyper-local. We were in panic mode. We got to do something about Ray's Highway. And I was telling this story a little bit last night. I remember sitting with my boss, former Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, is an avid butterfly naturalist. And in 2014, if you remember, the monarch butterfly population was in steep decline. My boss says, he's banging his fist on the desk, and he says, Ray's Highway has got to have milkweed for the monarchs. Ray's Highway has to have wildflowers. And I said, okay, Pierre. I said, we'll do 18 miles of wildflowers, and let's put a solar panel on the roadsides. Because in 2014, there were not many solar panels in the United States. In fact, the state of Georgia didn't start building solar until 2013. So solar was still new and it was still foreign to people. The form factor of solar, what does it look like? What does it mean for our communities? What does it mean for the land? So that was our very first idea. Let's put one solar panel in the median and 18 miles of wildflowers. And luckily, Harriet says, we got to do better than that. We can do more. And that is how we got to this process of, let's leverage the 18 miles as a proof point. It's not really a laboratory. We're not really going far out to try dangerous things, to try unproven things. This is really about do it somewhere first. Do it in a way that can be replicated. Rinse, repeat. Rinse, repeat. It has to be simple. Do the things that meet challenges. Don't chase bright, shiny objects. Break eggs. Do it somewhere first, and then tell other people how you did it and why you did it. And then from the test bed, perhaps we can tell enough people what we've done in order to get their interest in doing this at scale. So if we do it somewhere instead of just talking about it, maybe we could do it everywhere. I'll tell you by the numbers, 18 miles. We're now going into our 9th year. We just finished our 14th project. So 14 projects, 18 miles. I think we'll hit 20 projects in the next, 12 months or so. We've got a formal chartered partnership with GDOT Federal Highways, which means that I have done strategic planning with Federal Highways and Georgia DOT. We have a succession plan to make sure that the Ray never goes away. So this has become a fixture in the state, and we're continuing to add new projects. As a way of waking you up at the end of my talk today, I'm going to tell you about the new projects that we've done to see if I can get you interested in how we continue to refresh the highway culture. Our goal, and you have to have a goal, right? What drives us? What drives us is net zero. It hasn't always been net zero. At first it was sustainable highways, and then it was regenerative highways, and it's still sustainable and it's still regenerative, but the point is to go to zero. And specifically, zero carbon, zero waste, and zero death. And I want to just stay on the zero death point for a minute. So Vision Zero has to be at the center of any sustainability movement. If we cannot save human lives, what else are we doing? Right? It's crazy. So every time we talk about carbon, we need to circle around to vision zero. Every time we talk about vision zero gives us an opportunity to talk about the other zeros. And there's so much opportunity in net zero in transportation right now. We've got a lot of work to do, but the flip side of the coin is the opportunity. So this is an overview. Not all of the projects are represented, but Rima mentioned rubber modified asphalt. This was federal highways funded, so we didn't have any money in the rubber modified asphalt. We actually have a state specification for RMA at 10%. So this is kind of a traditional mix. If there's time, we can talk about RMA at the end, but we feel like it's really important for us to be upcycling in the transportation sector. What do I mean by upcycling? Like, what do we do with all the EV batteries that are going to come off of EVs when they're no longer appropriate for useful operation in the vehicle? We have to be thinking about end-of-life strategies and not just recycling the materials, but what's the next life, right? When an EV battery is not appropriate for the vehicle anymore, it's still 80% energized. Do y'all know that already? Like, this is crazy. We need to be able to take products at their end of life for their first life and redeploy them as grid storage is one example. So upcycling is one of our zero waste methods. The method to that madness of zero waste is upcycling, and with scrap tires, y'all know EVs are wearing scrap tires at about 20 to 30% faster rates. We're already generating about 265 million tires into landfills every year. That's 250 million scrap tires every year. Tires don't break down for 100 years. So you do the math, your kids, 265 million tires this year alone. And that number going up as we electrify, because electric vehicles wear tires faster because of the torque. So this is imperative, right? This is the imperative of going circular. And rubber modified asphalt has been around since the 1980s. We started paving with RMA in the 80s, which means that we have almost 50 years of product innovation and proving in RMA. Ask yourself why we don't pave with rubber modified asphalt every time we pave asphalt. I can't answer the question. But we have to be asking these questions, because I'll tell you, in this 1 mile of federal highways funded RMA, we upcycled 44,000 pounds of scrap tires. 1 mile, 4 lanes in a rural area. We were able to stick 44,000 pounds of tires in that 1 mile. And I'm not talking about linear landfills. I'm not talking about throwing all of our trash into the roadway. We know after 50 years that rubber modified asphalt lasts twice as long, that it's crack resistant, that it's quieter, which is an equity benefit to the communities that live around our interstates, our highways, and our arterials. We also know that rubber modified asphalt reduces small particulate matter, PM 2.5, the small soot that comes from brake wear and tire wear. So we can actually address PM 2.5 pollution from transportation by going in with rubber modified roads. These are no-brainers. I mean, there's no risk here. This is proven technology. It's a tool in the toolbox, and this is really a conversation about picking up tools and using them at scale. Asking yourself, every time we pave with asphalt, why isn't it rubber modified asphalt? What's holding us back? Another project that we've completed, Rima's talked about the rest area, which we think is an important showcase opportunity. The solar-powered EV charging was our very first project. I've already told you about our 2015 debut. In 2020, we upgraded that charging station to be 175 kW. So we're trying to keep up with the technology capabilities in the vehicles. Again, it's challenging, and we're going to go through a messy middle phase, but we have to roll out this infrastructure. We have to do more of it, and we have to figure out how to do it together so that we can hit those uptime targets. It has to be a public-private sector partnership. There's no one person and no one entity that can make this work. All of us have to do this together. We all have to be invested. Rima also talked about what we call our landscape lab. This is an important opportunity to carry forward, if you want, between the RAE and the commissions. We're looking to create a pooled fund study around this work. I'm going to show you some federal highways guidance in a minute. It came out in 2021. Federal highways has said in guidance that what you grow on the roadside is a priority project to federal highway. So it used to be that the roadsides of the interstate and highway system, the only priority was the transportation use. Nothing else could compete with the transportation use. That means adding another lane. And as of 2021, the Federal Highway Administration has said, actually, there's another class of projects because of pressing public needs related to the digital divide, related to energy reliability, and related to the climate crisis. There are public needs that are as important as the transportation use. And among the 6 projects identified in the guidance is native perennial plantings on the roadsides, unmowed. Why? Because transportation carbon is a non-point source. We are going to be really challenged to get everyone to reduce carbon from their tailpipes. What other tools are in the toolbox? You have soil. Soil sequesters carbon. If you take care of your roadside soils, your soils will sequester more carbon. This is in the guidance. Y'all think I'm crazy. You're like, this woman from Georgia is trying to talk to me about soil, which isn't that crazy, but I'm telling you, carbon sequestration should be a tool in your toolbox. There are carbon markets with carbon credits. We count carbon every day. You can count carbon in your roadside soils, but we have to start managing the soils for health because dead soils won't sequester carbon. Right? This is a Jerry Maguire moment. Help me help you. You have soil. You're the largest landowner in this country, in most states. You have soil. Count the carbon in your soil. Plant perennials, plant natives, and don't mow them. This is just not super complicated. The problem is that it shifts a paradigm. And the paradigm might not be as entrenched in this northwest part of the country. I can just tell you in the southeast, we treat our roadsides like our front lawn. We treat our roadsides like Augusta National. We plant Bermuda and turf grass and we mow it obsessively. That is the worst thing you can do for your soil, period, full stop. So we have to shift paradigms. If y'all are ahead in the game, you should lead. You should lead the country on this. It's your opportunity to say, we're already managing our roadsides with regeneration, with soil health, and with carbon sequestration in mind. We're already doing this stuff. Let's count carbon. And that's what we want the pooled fund study. Multiple states, pooling our resources together. Let's pool the studies together. But yeah, let's do the projects. Let's do pilots. And let's turn pilots into projects at scale. There's just immense opportunity here. I'll show you too. I think I've got some slides in this deck. We've got connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle projects. They don't really show well on a map, but 3M has connected road striping. That was a GDOT funded project. Our connected vehicle ecosystem is co-funded by the RAY and GDOT. We're 50-50 owners in that project produced by Panasonic. We're going to talk a lot about right-of-way solar. That's a project produced by the utility at their own cost. So Georgia Power and the Southern Company invested in 2,600 solar panels with pollinator habitat under and around the solar panels. So just to bring us back to the first thing I said, one solar panel and milkweed for the monarchs. With one project, we did 2,600 solar panels and 4 acres of pollinator habitat. I'm just here to tell you, this is not a special project. This is possible. This is possible at scale. This is not something unique about West Georgia. This is possible. We can do this. Rinse and repeat. It's not that complicated. And this is an old map, but this is gives you at least a decent idea of where we are now. So this nonprofit that started 8 years ago on 18 miles We're now in 29 states. USDOT just invested in the Ray as part of their Thriving Communities program. So recently, we just brought 15 local governments into our portfolio and into our umbrella. This is an old map, but it's brought us to Alaska. So we're now delivering technical assistance and projects to 2 cities and a borough in Alaska. In Washington State, we are partnered with the Nisqually tribe. We also just signed a partnership agreement with OregonDOT, so we're now officially partnered with Roger Millar and his team. We've long done work with Oregon. Maureen, I don't even remember when we first met, but we've done just a ton of thinking and imagining what we can do with your West Coast states. Simply put, if the state is colored in blue, it just means that we have paperwork. And I'll just say, keep it simple. We're a nonprofit. We're not going to be a part of procurement. We're not going to bill you, so we don't need paperwork. As a nonprofit, I don't care if we have a charter or an MOU or an LOI. We're not going to use the paperwork to take your resources. We're trying to give you resources. The paperwork matters not. However, some states, they want the paperwork. So you can see with TxDOT, City of Austin, we also work with DFW Airport, CDOT, South Carolina, Charleston County, Port of Charleston, most recently with Washington. We do have some paperwork. And I will tell you this too, as we've expanded, so we still have an office in Atlanta and in LaGrange, but we now have offices in other parts of the country. So we've got a team in Austin that co-offices with TxDOT. So I have a team of great people who report to work to the TxDOT office in Austin. And we just positioned someone in California to help support our Western activity. David Peters, who we hired from AASHTO, y'all might know him from his Navy work for AASHTO, but David Peters is now leading our Western region. We're hiring at the Ray. No, I don't want to hire Rima or Marine. Maybe I do want to hire Rima or Marine, but we're hiring for the Northeast and the Southeast. We're also hiring for the regenerative roadside work that we do, which we're starting to call natural capital. Creating natural capital from the transportation roadsides. We like talking about capital projects, revenue. We talked a lot about transportation funding yesterday. We're also hiring an energy manager, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but I'll just disrupt the room. If you're talking about transportation in this room, you're really talking about energy. And wherever the PSC or the PUC is, if they're talking about energy, they're really talking about transportation. Those sectors have collided. There's no way to separate them out again. We are talking about energy in this room, and we will be forever. So this is the guidance I was telling y'all about. Prior to this guidance, a couple of states had developed non-transportation projects on their roadsides. Oregon actually led with the development of solar arrays beginning in 2008. The Ray followed suit about 10 years later. We developed the project partnership for that megawatt solar array in 2016. I can't tell you firsthand about the Oregon experience, but I'll tell you firsthand about the Georgia experience. It was like crawling over broken glass. Federal highways in DC could not agree on how to treat these projects. Legal fought with environmental fought with realty. Nobody had the ball on how to develop non-transportation uses, how to develop non-transportation projects on the right of way. And then, as my mom says, the fish rots from the head. I don't mean that literally, but if your headquarters doesn't know how they feel about something, then you have 50 state federal highways offices, and they all have different opinions. So Colorado DOT was told that they could not develop solar. It was not possible to do that. Don't even try. In Georgia, we did try, and we crawled over broken glass for 4 years, even though we had a federal highways office that was willing to review a proposal and a permit application, but we ran into every issue known to man. And if I was staying another night, I would offer to buy you all drinks and I would go through each issue in minute detail because I'll go to my grave remembering section 710, which is a horrible, horrible section. Let me just tell you that this is, there's no silver bullets. This kind of fixes everything. This is the exception to the silver bullet rule. This guidance document is only 3.5 pages, but it basically says, look, there's a new class of projects that are priority for the right-of-way. I've already told you why. These are the pressing public needs. And there are 6 activities under this new project class. The project class is the same priority as the transportation use. Same priority as adding a lane. It's called Clean Energy and Connectivity Projects. We call it CEC for short. It's another acronym. And then there are 6 activities under the CEC umbrella. Solar arrays, transmission and distribution, the grid in your right-of-way. Locating the grid in your right-of-way with fiber. Perennial native ground cover, EV charging stations, and inductive wireless charging from the roadbed while you drive. All of that infrastructure is now under the umbrella of CEC or Clean Energy and Connectivity Projects, and it's all a priority now for your right-of-way. Federal highways in this memo waives fair market value. Free land from the federal perspective. So that gets the private sector's attention. They're like, free land. But let me tell you why I care. Because fair market value is the worst thing known to man and woman. Fair market value evaluation and processes are the worst. That's where projects go to die. When you have to assess the FMV of the right-of-way, it's awful. Your project will die because nobody knows what the fair market value of the right-of-way is. There are no comps. It's awful. So in this guidance, the feds have said, look, from a federal perspective, we're waiving FMV. These are priorities. Here's why and how we think you should do them. We're in a facilitate position. We're waiting for DOTs to bring these projects to us at scale. And then they also, in this document, talk about the CFR section that has existed for decades. The right-of-way is disturbed land. Projects on the right-of-way are projects on disturbed land, which means that they have a categorical exclusion from NEPA and permitting requirements. So all of this talk that we've been having about mansion-style permitting reform, right? We can't get projects permitted. How do we facilitate and how do we streamline permitting? I'm telling you that permitting is streamlined and facilitated on the right-of-way. It's already disturbed land. You have an accelerated pathway of public owned and operated land. There's no eminent domain. There's no NIMBY. Who's going to protest? We don't even see the right-of-way anymore as the traveling public unless we build beautiful wildflower meadows. We're looking at phones. We're looking at our consoles. We're looking at our user interface, right? Maybe billboards. In Georgia, there's a lot. We don't really look at the right-of-way anymore. But it is a deep asset that you manage and control. And there's deep value in pursuing these projects. Facilitated, streamlined siting, facilitated and streamlined permitting, and just think of the interstate. It connects where we live and where we work. It connects our communities, right? It delivers rural into urban. It goes everywhere we want to go, and it also goes everywhere that resources need to go. So I drove past Oregon's first solar array on my drive from Portland yesterday, and I swerved because I was that excited. I had a Taylor Swift kind of moment seeing your solar array. Oregon solar array inspired the world. We wouldn't be here without Oregon Solar Program. 15 years ago. 15 years ago. It's happening. 15 years later, solar economics are way better. I'm not here to try to get Oregon to do anything Oregon doesn't want, but these are just facts. Solar is the least expensive energy generation on our grid, full stop. Solar siting is becoming more and more complicated because we have so much large-scale solar across the country now that we're seeing environmental damage as a result of the large-scale solar, and we're seeing community pushback. If you want the example of that, I'll send you the news article of the Silicon Ranch site in West Georgia that silted out an entire waterway. And now the farmers cannot water their cows, their herds anymore. Silicon Ranch is being sued in court for hundreds of millions of dollars of environmental damage from that large-scale solar site. Communities in the Southeast, communities in and around Minnesota and the Great Lakes are speaking out about large-scale solar. I'm not here to speak out about it. I'm here to say, let's diversify the way that we do solar. And here's an example. This is the solar array that we brought online in February of 2020 with Southern Company. It took us 4 years to get to this point. It was the nation's first pollinator-friendly solar on the interstate system. It was also the first pollinator solar ever produced by Georgia Power, one of the first for Southern Company. It's grid connected, so we never did any direct connect to a transportation use. We just went straight to grid, which means that those electrons are being sold. So any questions about commercial activity being allowed on the right-of-way is now cured by this photo. Commercial activity, the vending of assets, energy assets, the commercialization of energy assets is allowed on the roadsides. Here's proof. In 2020, when we brought this site online, you can't see it in this photo because this is an early photo, but Georgia Power ended up building 44 high-mast LED lights at the entire interchange. That was their ROI, their return on investment to the system. So this project, very simple, brought 3 value streams from the roadside that was underutilized. Number 1, GDOT for 35 years is not responsible for maintaining this property. So a reduction of maintenance obligation, number 1. Number 2, unlit interstate, 12 miles, deer, a lot of it. We lit the interchange for safety. Georgia Power built and will maintain and operate 44 high-mast lights and light an interchange for 35 years. Value stream number 3, ag. Transportation land supporting agrivoltaics for clean energy and habitat to support bees and butterflies that go and work the farms in West Georgia. Blueberry farms, not far from the solar array. Blueberries have to have wild pollinators. This site gives them 4 acres of conservation property with pollinator habitat that will be maintained under contract for 35 years. And I keep waving my arms, telling people, like, for those of us who've been involved in land conservation and conservation habitat, we're always trying to find the funding sources. You can bake funding sources for land conservation and conservation habitat in these energy agreements. Every solar, I'm going to be a broken record, every asphalt mile should be RMA, every solar should be pollinator friendly at a minimum. It's a way to conserve acres and acres of pollinator habitat that are absolutely required for agriculture, for the food that Sabrina put together out there. That food had to have pollinators. You can bake the cost of that into these energy contracts. It's a no-brainer. And then suddenly, underutilized transportation land is creating clean energy value, and it's creating agricultural value. Like, this is a story you can sell at home. The other thing is that with pollinator-friendly solar, it's gorgeous. Users love roadside wildflowers. Give them roadside wildflowers. Just intersperse it with solar panels. It's a no-brainer. We've been doing this work with your DOTs. I think we just presented analysis to OregonDOT of what their roadsides are capable of producing. We're trying to do this with WashDOT. I think we're having trouble getting some of the data together to do the analysis for WashDOT. We are really struggling in California to do this work. I think we've reviewed 3 Caltrans districts. Again, these are data issues. And I'll just show you really quick what the data looks like. So the Ray has a nonprofit partnership with Esri. They do not give us money, and I do not care, because they give us software. They give us tools. They have some of the most brilliant engineers, software engineers in the world, and those software engineers build tools and they give them to us. And it's more powerful and it's more impactful than a check. I don't want Jack's money. I want these tools. They give them to us for free, and then we turn around and we give them to you for free, right? It's a virtuous circle. So we need parcel data for the roadsides. We need road center lines. We need road width. We need your state's digital surface model and digital elevation model. So when I talk about needing data sets, that's the kind of data sets that we need. We work with the department to figure out, obviously, safety setback, right? You can't build up to the edge of pavement. So how much safety zone do we want? Usually it's 40 feet. How far do we want to be from urban areas? How far do we want to be from natural gas pipelines? How far do we want to be from other existing infrastructure like water infrastructure? How close do we want to be to T&D, transmission and distribution? So that's our exclusion and our inclusion criteria. And then we go in with just a hard cut on solar radiation, right? We look at your local radiation information, and then we also look at aspect. We prioritize southern facing slopes. And then once we figure out where the solar radiation looks really good, then we complete the analysis with full suitability, which takes into account slope, elevation, aspect, and surface characteristics, including tree cover and existing facilities. We don't want to cut trees. We don't want to move your facilities. We want to take advantage of the land that is suitable, most suitable for solar development. And here's just a quick run through. These are Iowa's data sets. Here's some of the results. So I'll flick through, I'll scroll through Iowa's visualizations, but Iowa has about 38,000 acres of roadside land that is most suitable for all of those things I just went through. Surface, slope, aspect, solar radiation. Most suitable, 38,000. So does Pennsylvania. Maryland and Georgia each have about 19,000 suitable acres of roadside. Like, those are ready to go. This is scale. Y'all, this is gigawatt scale. This is not canteen solar. It's not a little bit here and a little bit there. North Carolina has 42,000 acres. Colorado and Arizona both have about 12,000 acres. This is what the suitability analysis tells us. Green means go. It's good to go. It's got good solar radiation. Surface characteristics are good. Then we can 3D model these. This gets technical. You decide how big the solar panels are. You decide how much land is between the rows of solar panels. This is totally customizable. And then we lay it out, and then you can become an avatar and you can walk around. And because you can walk around, we made a 6-foot avatar. We put the avatar on the top of a scenic viewing area in Iowa. We built the solar array up, and then we figured out, oh, geez, we need to take a couple of rows off because we're blocking the view. So we can actually do community impact analysis using the same tool once we have the 3D models laid out. And in that particular area, this is what you get. There's your turnaround. We reduce the solar array size to protect the view shed. And then we can give you carbon offsets. We can give you energy generation. We can give you value of solar on your local grid based on your local economics. We can give you carbon offsets. We can give you vehicles powered. So you can go in with this tool and you can plan roadside solar that can provide energy to your NEVI charging stations, right? This becomes an ecosystem. This becomes a resilient ecosystem. And this is why I'm telling you, transportation is energy now. Y'all have the land use for energy infrastructure that this world needs. Bless you. I'm going to make a couple of offerings before I close. Rima knows I'm super slow. I'm sorry. I thought an hour is so much time, but I really needed two. I'm sorry. We have a tool that can map truck travel trends so that you know where trucks are stopping and for how long. So that as you're thinking about megawatt charging systems, as you're thinking about hydrogen refueling stations, those are massive investments. We don't want to build bridges to nowhere. We want to put investments in the way of utilization. We want people to trip over this infrastructure so they'll use it, right? That does not conform with Vision Zero, but we want to put it in the way. So this is our solar power EV charging on the Ray. This is what we're talking about now. This is 10 megawatts of solar. It's 6 megawatt hours of battery storage. It's 34 charging ports. Its capacity is up to 350 kW. We got to be thinking scale. You can do scale with roadside solar, add the battery storage for resilience, and you've got a charging hub that can benefit passenger vehicles as well as MD and HD. We are offering free use of this software to transportation agencies at the local and state level. So I will quickly go back to sign up for a clinic to see truck travel trends visualized in your state so that you can then engage in specific planning for the infrastructure. We can offer that to you with Geotab, and here's an example of what it looks like. So the truck information is anonymized. We can give you visualizations with heat maps. You can tell the difference in these corridors. This is long haul between Dallas and Atlanta, evenly distributed, large number of sites, frequently populated across the sites. But look at Atlanta to Savannah. It's drayage, back and forth all day long. They ain't stopping. They're churning through trips back and forth. So you can see how the data reflects the difference in truck movements. I guess I'll just end with this. So a National Grid study came out earlier this year and says if we're going to electrify heavy-duty trucks, we need to be prepared for a minimum of 19 megawatts. In my head, I'm like, what does that mean? I know what a megawatt solar array looks like because we have one on the Ray, but what does 19 megawatts mean? Well, 19 megawatts is about the entire load for the city of LaGrange, population 35,000. For one charging hub for heavy and medium duty trucks, we got to replicate the energy availability that we have for our small cities today. There's no way to electrify MD and HD without expanding the grid, period, full stop. So I figure California's already burying 10,000 miles of transmission because of fires that affected Oregon. So y'all are already positioning infrastructure that PG&E is burying for resilience. You're already doing this work. How much of that buried infrastructure that PG&E is going into the ground with is going to disturb greenfield? How much of those 10,000 miles are they going to go into their own utility right-of-way? What's the opportunity for us to think about some of those 10,000 miles that PG&E is going to bury, moving the areas of conflict into the right-of-way? So we can do that at the Ray. Just like Esri made the solar mapping tool, Esri also made a transmission mapping tool. And we use that now. We've used it with the state of Minnesota because y'all know that the MISO grid is expanding the Great Lakes energy transmission with the largest investment in transmission ever made in this country's history. It's called Tranche 1. So we've mapped Minnesota's right-of-way We have underground layers regarding bedrock, organic soils, water features, railroad bridges, transportation bridges. We now can go underground with insights, and we can position transmission and distribution underground and in your right of way. And what I wonder is offshore wind development, that's going to need transmission and distribution. You got to get power from remote generation to load centers where it's used. Where's offshore wind going to go with new T&D? Through your communities? We should put that in the right of way. In Northern California, PG&E is buried 10,000 miles. Is that going to go in any communities? We should put that in the right of way. And then what about your West Coast electric highway? When will you need more energy to support MD and HD? How do we get that energy in the ground to support those charging hubs, to support your West Coast electric highway? There's an opportunity for Oregon, Washington, and California to lead. You already have the collaboration. You already work together. You're already thinking outside the box with regenerative highway design. You're already there, right? It's just taking advantage of opportunities to figure out how to do what the feds are waiting. Feds are waiting for these projects. The feds are waiting for your departments of transportation to envision tomorrow's use of the right-of-way that we've held forever. And Sabrina, I know I gotta go. Wisconsin, they did it. This is 2018 Badger Coulee. It's I-90, I-94. The DOT still meets with the PUC every quarter. That's collaboration. That's Transpo and Energy talking to each other. Can you do that interstates? Can you get energy and transportation to talk regularly? Collaboration amongst yourselves, but collaboration, Transpo to Energy delivered this project in 2018 in Wisconsin. This is not old news. This is a blueprint. This is a playbook. We can do this. And then I threw this in just to scare y'all. That's crash barrier. That is HVDC. That's high voltage DC going in the right of way, just on the other side of the edge of pavement. I don't have visualizations of the tool because it's brand new, but I would love to be using the tool with y'all. And then I will just say one thing about connected vehicles, and then I will walk off, Sabrina. We started this work in 2018. We contracted with Panasonic in 2019. It's now a $70 million statewide GDOT program. We have all the things, safety use cases, right? So connected vehicle data flows to understand crash detection, weather impacts like black ice or hydroplaning, hard braking events, which is different from crash detection, that's congestion and queue. Work zone warnings with specifics about how your operation of your vehicle should change. All of that being automated from connected vehicle data flows to a management platform, developing insights and spreading them amongst users as well as your community alerts and your dynamic message boards. We took it a step further. We have freight signal priority at the Savannah Brunswick Port. We have freight signal priority around the Atlanta area for arterials. Of course, we have all of this on the RAY. We have transit signal priority in the Atlanta area. We actually had to tune our transit signal priority because our buses were early. People were missing the bus because the bus was getting there minutes early. And then we have emergency signal preemption at the local level. Where I'm going with this is that one of our new projects is with a tire OEM. We had a discussion about rubber last night at dinner, so I'm a little worried about talking about tires again, but a tire OEM with a connected and smart tire. So we worry about GPS, we worry about geography, we worry about surveillance when we're getting at road usage charge. Our bet in working with this connected tire OEM is that we can count revolutions. Tires don't know where they've gone, but they know how many times they've gone around. And if we can count revolutions with a connected tire that can talk periodically with the roadside infrastructure that we've already developed and the connected signalized intersections, then that just gives us another tool in the toolbox for RUC. George is involved in RUC now, and we're going to be adding that partner to the Ray Highway. We've also added impact detection systems with 3M. That is a connected system that lets you know when your roadside crash barrier has been impacted the minute it's impacted, so that you can repair that roadside crash barrier infrastructure, that safety infrastructure. We also are developing drones as a first responders to get first eyes on the scene from drones overhead to understand how to keep first responders safe and most effective and efficient. And then we also just added some sensors to our roadside projects to count carbon in the soil. It's a new program that we have with a company called Phenode, which is ag tech, agricultural sensors deployed on the roadsides of the interstate system. Because the same thing that we're doing with ag, no-till, we don't till the roadsides. It's the same thing. We can do these on the roadsides just by adding a little bit of tech. I'm leaving a lot of information on the field, I'm really sorry, but I'm also going to be here for a few more hours if there's anything else you want to pick up on. I'd love to have a follow-on conversation with y'all. And thank you again for allowing me to take up time on your agenda today. I hope I've given it back to you with some valuable information. And my hope is that this is just another conversation and a partnership that will bear a lot of fruit on the West Coast. The question I leave you with is, what can the Ray do here? What can we do for you? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry we're squeezing you so much. I know that all of us could listen a lot longer. We do have a full agenda, but thank you, Allie. And we don't really have time for questions, but she will be here. We will have a break, and also there's email information, so please contact and ask your questions. I think that maybe some point we need to do this again, but virtually, where we can have more conversations. So thank you. Right. Next agenda item. You're moving forward. Thank you for moving swiftly.
So good morning. My name is Amanda Peets. I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I oversee our policy, planning, research, data, and climate office efforts. And we're going to talk more about climate. So I think Allie did a great job kind of setting us up for that conversation. In particular, our presentation will focus a little bit more on electrification. And I'll get into that. Dan Carlson is joining me from Oregon Department of Transportation as well, and she's my climate officer. So we'll be tag teaming this conversation today. So Sabrina's bringing up the presentation now. I can turn this towards me and advance the slides. Right, Sabrina? All right, so I'm preaching to the choir here because we all know climate change is an issue. Climate change is upon us. We see it every single day, and it's creating more severe and intense wildfires, heat, intense rainfall, intense snowfall, storm surges, and that's manifesting as landslides, as flooding, as coastal erosion, and it's impacting people's lives. Loss of life is huge and growing all the time, devastating communities, and especially when the transportation system is disrupted, it has many, many effects that are really important and that impact people's lives. Just within the last 2 decades, as we look at the Oregon Department of Transportation, every 5 years we're spending $15 million more addressing these types of issues. So it's cutting into our budgets. It's having a profound effect on communities as well. If you look at kind of the broader effects beyond just the transportation system and some of our costs, we're talking about $20 billion since 1990. Over half of that is in the last 10 years. So huge impacts, huge costs that the climate poses on things. But there are ways within the transportation system that we can try to focus investments to try to better prepare for some of these events so that we're not disrupted as these events occur. So what we found is every $4 spent on kind of trying to protect the system will in the long run save about $25 when we come to kind of recovering the system afterwards. So it's a good upfront investment. I think though, we all know that's challenged by keeping things in a state of good repair. That's in a state of good repair. We all know from conversations yesterday, we have less money. We're less able to keep things in a state of good repair. This is only going to get worse and worse as the imperative is upon us. I'll turn it to Suzanne to talk a little bit about our adaptation efforts.
So we're preparing to prepare. We spent a couple of years talking within the agency about what it's going to take to improve policies and preparation to adapt and recover from these types of extreme events. In January, we had our Transportation Commission, thank you, approve our climate adaptation and resilience roadmap, which we're also using to sync with the federal requirements to protect funding that's coming. So a couple things we did there, we looked at historic and future climate data and created a map so we know where the worst impacts are coming for 9 different hazards. So whether it's going to be wildfires, drought, or flooding, landslides, et cetera, we can narrow in on that. And then we combine that with social equity as well as with freight corridors and high priority, high volume corridors. And putting those 3 together, we know where to prioritize investments. So we're looking at where is there going to be the biggest disruption, who is it going to impact, and then how do we recover in terms of tying the freight piece in. What are those, what does the need to look like? How long would it need for the road went out? And we had some examples where smaller businesses weren't able to get their goods to market. So really looking at that freight movement piece and making sure we're focusing on corridors where we can keep things up and running. So we've got some good preparation happening there. And those are the tiered corridors you see the map there.
So climate is kind of 2 sides of a coin. One is addressing the impacts that are happening to the transportation system. The other is we don't want it to get worse. It's already huge, enormous burden on our communities. So how do we stop it from getting worse? Well, I think we all know transportation is one of the worst emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to try to lower our carbon footprint. There's 2 primary ways to do that. One is by reducing vehicle miles traveled for passenger vehicles. That's often an individual choice, right, of how people travel, how they want to travel. But there are ways as transportation entities that we can influence that. Pricing is one option. There was a road usage conversation yesterday. So depending on the price point, that sends signals to people to drive more efficiently, maybe take fewer trips. We can invest more in low and no carbon emission modes, making those connections, making those opportunities available. We can pursue demand management strategies, and then we can try to have land use where jobs and housing are close together that offers opportunities for people to actually bike, walk, or take public transportation. The other side of that is we recognize that the majority of people still will drive in the future. While we can reduce vehicle miles traveled, majority of people will drive. So how do we make every single mile driven clean? And so that's what we'll focus a little bit more on here today. The chart on the left is kind of showing the ways in which it shows our goal down at the bottom line of how we need to reduce emissions. And then it showed in 2018, so we've been working on this for about a decade of trying to reduce emissions, we hadn't made a lot of progress. So what were the ways, what were the levers that we need to enact to make a change? And there's a number of different things. There's no one silver bullet. That said, over 50% of our progress can be made through cleaner vehicles and fuels. So we've been working on that in earnest since 2020, and our new trend line bends that curve to a 60% projected emissions reduction by 2050, so pretty significant. And that comes from Advanced Clean Cars 2 adoption, regulations from our partners at Department of Environmental Quality, our investments in transportation electrification. All these things are having a pretty profound effect on bringing emissions down. For us, we're all in on electrification as we talk about clean vehicles and fuels for transportation. That is electrification. So our commission doubled down on federal commitments. So we're looking at a $100 million investment through 2025 in charging infrastructure. So as we talk about transportation electrification, I use that term very purposefully because it's not just cars and trucks. It's multimodal. It's transit buses, freight trucks, electric bikes, and electric scooters. As we look at these things, we're putting the majority of investments, I think, across all states in light-duty charging infrastructure. Why is that? Well, because the cars are out there, the regulations are there, the market's moving in that direction, That's a clear need. And then as we think about what's the public role in this? So we know Tesla makes investments, Electrify America makes investments in charging infrastructure. So I often get the question, well, so everybody else is doing it, why does the public need to make investments? And that's because we're filling the gaps in which the private sector doesn't invest. They look at point-specific locations. We can, as public, look at an interconnected corridors and networks. That's the NEVI funding. We also can go where it's not profitable necessarily for the private sector to go in. So think about rural areas, low income, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So that's kind of our niche. And I think it's really important that we understand where the public sector investment niche is. For medium and heavy duty, there's trucks being manufactured. We have Daimler here in the state of Oregon manufacturing trucks. We have California purchasing a lot of those trucks, putting in some charging infrastructure. But as you heard from Allie, the electrical capacity is going to be an enormous issue for that mode and that shift. And so we really have to be partnering with our utilities, and it takes about 5 years to plan for those things to come about. And that's a long time, so we have to be starting that now. From the public side, I think in-route charging is where we can support, which is again along interstates, things like that. And then also being opportunistic. So the investments that we make today, even our NEVI investments, right? We're building that corridor. How can we future-proof and add more electrical capacity or the conduits to our sites? That's going to be a key piece. For micromobility, a little bit different animal here. What that really helps with is reducing vehicle miles traveled, that other side that I was talking about earlier. And it's a game changer. I bike to and from work. I live in a hilly area. I have seen triple the amount of bikes on my commute, and they're all electric bikes. It increases the availability to people with more ability. It also increases the range. So oftentimes we talk about walking and biking, particularly biking, as a 6 mile or less trip. We're talking about a much bigger radius with electric bikes. So there's a lot of potential there. As we think about public sector and the role we can play, it's probably less on the infrastructure side, right? People are charging those type of things at home. We can be opportunistic. We can add low voltage plug-in to some of our charging stations. But what we really have to look at there is incentives and some of our policy infrastructure. So I talked about the kind of investment role. Let's talk about some of the broader other public sector role of agencies like ours. One is that we're not bound by profitability. We're not bound by service territories in the way that we can look at a state holistically. So we're uniquely positioned to look at needs across the whole system. We're uniquely positioned to develop partnerships to address those needs and bring the right players to the table. Therefore, we are convener, and that's a key role that we can play. We also have data and information. I think Allie talked about some of the data and information of the RAE. State agencies have that as well. We share information from the DOT to our partners at Energy. They talk about how many new electric vehicles are on the road, where charging infrastructure is. It helps us make better decisions, and it helps the public understand what's out there and available. And then lastly, as I mentioned on the previous slide, we can deploy infrastructure. We infill from the private side, and then we can help make sure that the infrastructure is consistent and interoperable. Some of the ways, some of the needs and approaches for charging infrastructure that are unique is the scale of how we have to increase the number of charging ports out there. So we did analysis in the state just from the year 2020 to 25. We need a 5 times increase in the number of charging ports out there. And basically, we're doubling charging infrastructure every single year to the year 2035. So it's a boatload more charging infrastructure we need that corresponds to all new vehicles sold being electric by 2035. So that's the amount of infrastructure we need. It's pretty significant. We're making some significant investments. So in that same time period, we're investing $100 million. So it helps. It's doubling our DC fast charging ports, increasing our level 2 charging. But you can see even just in this time frame, there's still a significant gap. So there is that continued need for public and private sector investments over this time period. It's also not one and done funding. Allie gave the example of going and charging infrastructure not working in a place. That's going to be huge. The user experience is going to be huge. We need to make sure that we're upgrading the sites, that we're maintaining them long term. As I talked about kind of the needed increase of a doubling of charging infrastructure every year, it's going to be hard to meet that because there's supply chain issues, and there's the planning issues, there's utility upgrades. All these kind of things are going to make it challenging to get the ramp up that we need in the time frame that we need. And that relates to the capacity of the grid, those other issues. So what do we need? Partnerships, absolutely critical. Coordination and collaboration among state agencies. We should be DOT should be best friends with our departments of energy, best friends with our departments of environmental quality, and with the public utility commissions, all those things. We need to be working together collaboratively to solve those problems. We need to be pulling on our utility partners. The grid is key. We have to be planning early. We have to be working together. There are different funding sources for the Department of Energy than there are for the Department of Transportation. We should be leveraging the two and pulling those together and co-celebrating. And then across state lines. So we'll have some examples from Suzanne here in a sec on just some partnerships between our western states. Suzanne will hit quickly on kind of funding. How are we looking at leveraging funds that are dedicated towards one thing and we're trying to spread that to benefit others? How are we targeting investments and how are we seeking additional funds? And then how are we leveraging our knowledge in order to support others and enable them to do this same kind of work? We all need to be in this together, working in the same direction. So with that, Suzanne, you want to touch on those examples?
So Amanda mentioned leveraging our funding and our $100 million investment. Some of that, obviously, for this group is going to be the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure funding that we're getting from the federal government. So we're preparing to deliver that on key corridors across the state. And then as we do that, bring in these other modes. So looking to put 110-volt chargers there for micromobility so that you can charge your bike for a road trip, you can charge your mobility scooter that you may be carrying with you as well. So looking for those opportunities. And then future-proofing as best as possible. So while those dollars focus on light duty, we're proposing a quad pod. So out of 4 ports, one will be up to 350 kilowatts for that higher volume charging, looking at those larger pull-through areas for larger vehicles. And then a bit of a spoiler, something we're going to talk about with our commission tomorrow, looking at carbon reduction program dollars and investing in strategic NEVI sites where we can actually build them out for medium and heavy duty. So bringing in other dollars to combine with that same delivery to provide for medium and heavy duty along key corridors. Yeah. And then we also have some state dollars that we're putting in there. So in terms of where the value is of the public dollar, there's building out those key corridors, and then they're strategically going into communities, and especially where that public dollar can make the most impact. And borrow a lot from California's playbook here with your rebate program. So we do have a community charging rebate program. Our first tranche was $1.75 million. Day one, we were in kind of a panic because $1 million started flying out the door immediately. We were like, we're going to have to shut it down in 3 days, which we didn't. It all settled out, but we did really good outreach. So we went to communities, let them know it was coming, got them prepared, and people were in the queue already with those applications. 30% was for any part of the state, and that funding went pretty quickly. It's still open for the 70%, which is reserved for high priority communities, which is low income communities, multifamily housing, thinking about transportation network company drivers who might live in that multifamily housing and how they can go to EV, and then rural communities, making sure we spread the wealth into rural communities that have those longer trips. So it is still open to those, and we're going to be closing in October, and then doing kind of lessons learned, how do we better target, how do we do more outreach, and how do we make sure this is a successful program. Many in the room already know about this as well. We're looking for how do we get those additional federal dollars. So the charging and fueling infrastructure program is one. We went in with the 3 states in the room here for an I-5 medium and heavy duty corridor, waiting to hear in the next month or so, hopefully, building out medium heavy duty charging as well as the hydrogen stations proposed along that corridor and getting down to the ports, which we're from today as well. And then Oregon also put in a standalone one going east-west and building out that I-84 corridor with a bit of a different approach. So not so much that en route charging, although there's some of that, but also looking at how can we serve those regional fleets and those more medium fleets. So FedEx, UPS, school buses, people that are staying in the community and might be parking overnight. So kind of looking at this different kind of partnership model and really testing and piloting how we advance and accelerate transition in all kinds of sectors. And then we just released some technical support, which I think are really useful documents, especially for local communities. Where do you start? How much is it going to cost? Where should I put these chargers? Should I go level 2, level 3? How do I accommodate e-bikes and this type of thing? So we've come out with a guide for Oregon EV charging deployment, which is at the website listed here. It's kind of a one-stop shop for what do I do as a local community to get my game plan together, go after these dollars and get my permitting and everything I need to do to deploy. We also have some additional resources there. Amanda mentioned the modeling that we've done of the five times increase in charging infrastructure. So there's an Excel spreadsheet tool that a local agency can put in their information and kind of model out what they might need in their community. And then we also have a map so they can see where that infrastructure exists today. Maybe it's already covered over near the Walmart and the this and the that, but there's another part of their community that really is short in charging and being able to really strategize and see, again, what level and what location infrastructure.
So I think we'll turn it over to Washington. Is that who's next?
Yes.
Okay. And then we'll be happy to answer questions after.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. My name is Luke Marland. I work for the Department of Ecology. My bureaucratic title is Climate Commitment Act Implementation Manager. What that means is I'm in charge of the design and implementation and now operation of the state's Cap and Invest program. And I was asked to come give you a brief introduction to the program, but also give you an update of where we're at, what the auctions are producing revenue-wise, how the program is functioning, where those funds will go, some of which is directly relevant to what you work on, and then close out talking about linkage, which is relevant to all to California and Washington, and is something to be very aware of on the horizon because it will impact the various programs and the revenue that flows from. I will try to speed it up a little bit because we're a little bit behind. Leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm not going to cover every single slide. I think you have that material. There's contact information at the end, so if there's anything that I don't cover and you look at the slides, you want more information, please reach out. And I don't know how you want to structure it. I welcome questions as I go, or do you want to wait for the end? I don't know what's best, but either option is fine. Is it loaded yet?
Well, I didn't see yours on there.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
Sabrina, do we have?
Well, then I'll be ad-libbing. But we'll get through the info one way or another. We'll make sure you have the presentation. Let me start with, just for the sake of time, I'll start with sort of an overview of the program, make sure we're all on the same foundation, and then I'll start talking about some of those relevant issues. So the program basics is that it is a cap and invest program that covers about 75% of the emissions in the state. So very roughly about 75% of the state's economy. And what it does is it places a cap on those emissions, and that cap declines over time. And if you're a covered entity, if you're a heavy industry, if you're a fuel supplier, including someone who supplies transportation-related fuel, if you're an electric utility, if you're a natural gas utility, if you're any of the entities or sectors that are a part of that 75% of the state's economy, you need to obtain allowances equivalent to your emissions. And the cap is on the total number of allowances. And it declines each year, which means those allowances become scarcer and scarcer, logically more and more expensive under supply and demand. And that incentivizes you as the entity to reduce your emissions, to decarbonize. The other aspect, that's the cap. The other aspect of the cap and invest program is those allowance auctions generate revenue. And that revenue then is plowed back into projects for clean energy, projects to decarbonize the economy, a lot of transportation-related projects, including, building EV chargers, incentivizing purchase of EVs, and also programs focused on equity and environmental justice and resiliency for communities. So it's hopefully a virtuous cycle where the cap incentivizes reductions by covered entities and sectors. The revenue raised from those auctions is used to keep that decarbonization process going and to accelerate. The cap is initially quite steep. From 2023, this year, to 2030, 7% a year. That's a very steep rate of decline. And then it mitigates from 2030 to 2040, to 2040 to 2050. So that's not, I don't think, directly relevant to transportation, but be aware of that issue, that it's initially a steep rate of decline, because that's something that often comes up in conversations about the Cap and Invest program and also about the revenue raised. Now, what sectors are covered and what's not. I've already given you an overview of the covered sectors. It's basically all types of fuel, transportation fuel, gas and diesel. It's natural gas, heating fuel, it's electricity, it's heavy industry. They're in a separate category, but it's heavy manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, cement, all these kinds of facilities and industries that make something but emit a lot of emissions in the process of doing so. There's certain things that are not. One is agricultural operations. Another is basically maritime fuels for fishing fleets. And also, if you're a smaller facility, great, thank you so much, and I'll jump over here and start moving the slides. If you're a large facility like the heavy manufacturing,
you want to say next slide.
let me get you up to speed. We're up on the one that has a pie chart that says what counts as covered emissions. Perfect. Great, thanks a lot. If you're a heavy industry, as I said earlier, you're covered, you would be a facility that emits more than 25,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year. If you're a smaller manufacturing facility, you're underneath that threshold, and so you're not covered. So this slide lists sectors, industries, facilities that are covered, and those that are not covered. Next slide, please. Now, one thing I won't spend time on because I want to be time for questions and discussion is offsets, but just be aware of this issue. An offset is basically a mechanism to offset some of your emissions. For example, if there's a large forestry parcel in an area of the state and it's managed in certain criteria, that basically can be sold as a credit to industry or some other covered entity, and they can also use that under the program. So next slide, please. If you have questions about this, please let me know, but it's not something that I wanted to spend a lot of time on. Let's jump now to implementation, where we're at, what kind of revenue is being raised, and what kind of issues you might want to be aware of. The program started on January 1st of this year. The law that was passed establishing the program was only passed in the summer. We signed it to law in the summer of 2021. So we got it up and rolling in a year and a half, which is an unprecedented time. It began in January. We're going to talk about auctions in a moment. We've had 3 of our auctions so far. Right now, we're in the phase of continuing outreach and assistance to the covered entities and participants. We're also developing what we call third-party verification and some other aspects of the program. And we're also constantly in touch with various sectors of the economy and providing them ongoing assistance. With technical assistance mentioned earlier, and it's absolutely key because our objective is to make sure that the covered industry, for example, manufacturers and fuel suppliers, are able to participate in this program successfully. It's new. It's a little scary to many of them. Some of them do not like the program. It's another thing they need to participate in. And our goal is to try to work with them to make sure that they can participate successfully. Next slide, please. I want to go through and give you an update of where we're at as far as the auctions go and the funding stream goes, and then talk about linkage before I close it out. So we've had 3 regular auctions so far. In all of those auctions, all the allowances have been sold. And in fact, demand has exceeded the allowances substantially. That's a good sign. That means there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of demand for those allowances, and the allowances are being snapped up by covered entities when they're offered for sale. You will see that a substantial amount of revenue has been raised, far above projections. I'll show you, the next slide will show you the 3rd auction, but we've already exceeded $1 billion. The estimate was about half that. And that $1 billion, and probably by the end of the year will be 1.3 billion approximately. That's a lot of revenue that's available for good projects to be put back into projects that decarbonize the economy. And I'll talk about that in a moment. One of the prime areas that we'll be focused on is transportation. So, strong demand, strong revenue growth, but prices have been climbing. Can you show the next slide, please? And you'll see that in the auction number 3, the price is now $63 in allowance. And that is substantially higher than California. Last price in the combined California-Quebec shared auctions, they've had that for over a decade, was about, I think, $35. So a big spread between our price in our auctions and their prices in their auctions. And there could be many, many factors that go into it, including that ours is a new market, takes some time to shake down, and also it's a smaller market. It's a tighter market. And if you remember earlier, I mentioned the rate of decline that is one of the drivers of prices, and I mentioned how right now that's a steep rate of decline. That could be one of the factors that's driving prices. We don't get in the habit of we cannot predict prices in the future, and we don't do that. We more track what's going on right now and see if there's trends, but where the market will go 6 months from now or a year from now, I don't think we can really predict with accuracy. It's a market. So one of the key points I try to convey when we discuss this is it's a market and it will fluctuate, it will go up and down, and we do some modeling to try to predict that on a macro level, years in the future. But auction by auction, what will happen, or 6 months by 6 months what will happen, is really, really tough, if not impossible, to forecast. I'm not going to talk about the APCR auction. I'm not going to talk about that. It's really a smaller auction that's meant to put more allowances into the market to help contain prices, but I don't think it's something we need to spend time. Once again, when you look at the slide deck, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Next slide. So where does all this revenue go? We so far generated over $1 billion in less than one full calendar year. Where does it go? Well, what's interesting about Washington's statute is it's all tracked into certain designated accounts that have very specific statutory language about how they must be spent. Ecology does not control the allocation of these funds. They're all appropriated by the legislature. So the legislature, the Treasury receives the funds, the legislature appropriates them into projects, but there's a lot of statutory language about what kind of projects they should be appropriated for and where the money should be directed. And initially, most of the revenue goes to the fund, the CERA fund, the Carbon Emissions Reduction Account, which is heavily focused on reducing emission transportation. Why? Because as already explained, it's the #1 source sector-wise of emissions for our state, for your state, for most states. And it's also low-hanging fruit that you can, through incentives and building EV chargers and doing all these other good things, you can hopefully substantially reduce emissions. So as far as the funding goes, as far as the funding that would be available for transportation-related projects, it will be quite substantial. Those projects should get priority if the legislature allocates those funds. Next slide, please. I wanted to hit on a few other topics and then talk about linkage. So one of the other aspects about Washington's program and the bill that created Washington's programs, there's a very strong emphasis on equity and trying to address historical patterns of environmental racism. So there's a requirement that a minimum of 35% of overall funds, of that $1 billion+ be allocated to projects that help determine statutes as overburdened communities. But think of communities of color, poor communities, communities that have a disproportionate impact historically of environmental burdens. The goal is 5% higher than that, 40%. And in addition to that, so on top of that 35 to 40%, there's a requirement that 10% of funds be directed towards projects that have support of a tribe. And in many cases, will probably be located in tribal territories. So that means a total of 45% to 50% at a minimum is directed toward overburdened communities or projects on tribal territories. There's also requirements that we report to the legislature after the first compliance period, which is 4 years, and there's a process to look at the program and assess its performance and improve. Next slide, please. So I want to hit on linkage. Linkage is a really big issue that will affect the durability of our program, will affect allowance prices, and therefore will affect revenue available projects in general, but also transportation-related projects. I mentioned earlier that California and Quebec have a long-standing partnership. They both have had cap and invest, they call it cap and trade or cap and invest programs operational for over a decade. They've been linked for over a decade, and they share allowance auctions. So when allowances are auctioned off, they're auctioned off together in a joint auction, and they share the revenues. We are now examining whether Washington will join that shared market. And the Climate Commitment Act was written in a way to require us to do that. So the expectation from Washington's perspective is that we will investigate that. But there's certain statutory criteria that need to be met. And ecology is now looking at those statutory criteria. The director of ecology has authority to make a decision about whether the state will pursue linkage. She anticipates reaching a preliminary decision in late October. Now, that's just us. It's a dance. So basically in October, ecology on behalf of Washington says, yes, we want to dance. And then obviously California and Quebec will need to go through their own processes and reach their own determinations. But that ball is rolling as far as Washington is concerned. And for the next few months or the next year, you will probably hear more about linkage. And the value in linkage is that a small market like Washington's, right now an expensive market like Washington's, when I say expensive, I mean the allowance prices. If it links with the bigger market of California, Quebec, which is about 6 times larger, it means there's more liquidity in the market for allowances. It means allowance prices will probably decrease, which is easier for businesses and entities to then participate successfully in the program. Now that means less revenue compared to what we generate now per allowance, but it also means the program should be more durable. Because prices will be more stable, be more liquidity, and also they'll be lower over time for covered entities. So it'll be less of an impact on them, less of an impact on the economy in general. But we need to look at statutory criteria, and we need to make our determination, and we need to engage in a process with 2 other jurisdictions to see if we can reach agreement as far as linkage goes. Can you go to the next slide? So we had, I think I just covered that. You go to the next one. I have one of my colleagues, contact info up here, Claire Boyd-White. She is superb. Here's her contact information. My contact information is basically the same email. It's luke.martland. So luke.martland, MARTLAND, CYWA.GOV. Please reach out to her and or I. And if you have any questions, then we'll do our best to answer them and provide information. So I wanted to stop there. I know I went quickly, but once again, reach out with questions. And would love to answer your questions or have discussion.
Go ahead and start talking because the intro slide is me talking about myself. So, good morning, and we're very happy to be here with you today. This morning, I'm going to focus on freight and our Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment in the state of California, and then I'll transition to Bonnie Nixon with our Long Beach container terminal. So, the California Transportation Commission has been planning zero-emission freight infrastructure needs. Senate Bill 671, authored by State Senator Lena Gonzalez from our Gateway Cities region, which is also by our San Pedro Bay Port Complex, requires the Commission to develop a report on zero-emission infrastructure needs through our state along vital freight corridors. This report, which we call the Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment, which we're still on the first slide, is due to our state legislature in December, this December 2023. We're anticipating publishing our final draft, or our first full draft, later this month in September. Before I continue, and now we'll start getting into some of the material, I need to acknowledge Associate Deputy Director Hannah Walter and our SB 671 Coordinator, Kayla Giese, who are not with us today. They've been integral in the development of this assessment. And we've also been fortunate to secure a consultant contract with McKinsey, who is a global management consultant with expertise in transportation. I will keep going. The main products of this report are to identify priority freight corridors in California. And it also identifies the zero-emission freight infrastructure needed in California, and it identifies barriers and solutions to. As we've discussed over the course of the tri-state meeting, our air regulations, medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles and fleets will come into full enforcement in the next 10 to 15 years, meaning that an effective transition to zero emissions is critical. This assessment aims to provide our California legislature with a roadmap on how to do that. The development of this assessment has been a 20-plus month effort, and we've organized a working group that has met regularly, which includes over 200 members, half of which are regularly active in our work. These members are made up of our sister state agencies, regional and local governments, the trucking industry, OEMs, public health and environmental advocates, port authorities, and our Mexican government representative partners south of our. One aspect I particularly want to highlight is that our commission has been leading the development in close coordination with the California Air Resources Board, the California Energy Commission, the California Public Utilities Commission, Caltrans, the Governor's Office, and legislators and legislative staff.
Almost there.
Okay, because this next one is a map, and I think it's kind of important, but it's the third, we're on the third slide. I will talk. The draft assessment identifies 6 top freight corridors in California, which is based on freight volume, key segments of each corridor, and the extent of emissions along each corridor. The selection of the top 6 freight corridors is based on federal highway analysis framework data, truck GPS data, and other data we've collected or procured. These top freight corridors demonstrate, or we're referring to this as an initial or minimum viable network, which we need to support our transition to zero, medium, and heavy-duty space. The assessment also identifies 34 additional priority corridors that have local, regional, and statewide significance when we can begin to build out our ZEP network beyond the initial viable network. Next slide, please. So this one is a highlight of our smaller segments that link the main highways to our ports and also the top 6 corridors in our border with Mexico. I want to highlight the I-710, which is a primary link to our San Pedro Bay Port Complex as a top corridor because it connects I-10 and I-5 to the ports of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach. I-5 obviously goes all the way from the U.S.-Mexican border. And this is also an important area of this assessment as we recognize the need for zero emissions infrastructure near the U.S.-Mexico border. As also demonstrated throughout this tri-state meeting, Interstate 5 is nationally significant along the East Coast and our border with Canada. To also point a bit to Bonnie's presentation, which we'll hear next, our San Pedro Bay Port Complex is vital to its movement, not only for our state, but for our country. This is why we've identified this particular link as one of our top corridors in assessment. We will not achieve our air qualities unless we can address the concentration of diesel trucks and how to transition them to zero at our seaports. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a technical slide, so I'm going to go over it relatively briefly. The CTC employed McKinsey to build a model with many different inputs to estimate zero emission freight needed under 3 different powertrain adoption scenarios. So on the left, you see pure battery electric. On the right, you see pure hydrogen fuel cell. In the middle, you see a balance of the 2, which is obviously the approach that we would recommend. This has come up a bit throughout the conversation, but we, based on the assessment, for that reason, determined that we're going to do a let the market decide approach between electric versus hydrogen. The assessment acknowledges the benefits and challenges of both. And just to briefly summarize this, this is our estimated need for the build out of these scenarios over the next 15 years. Next slide, please. So going back to our corridors, the draft assessment has found that there's benefit to focusing first on this minimum or initial viable network of infrastructure along the top 6 freight corridors that we've identified in the state of California. And just to kind of see it through, each tick on this map, or little line across the state routes, the interstates, represents a 50-mile length where we recommend the consideration of replacement of the medium and heavy-duty zero-emission infrastructure. Next slide. Okay, so the barriers and the solutions identified in the assessment are kind of the crux of the entire assessment. So I would ask you all to turn your attention to that when we publish it later this month. But they fit, our barriers and solutions fit broadly into categories of time, cost, and a complex stakeholder loop. One key piece of our assessment is that the recommendations included potential solutions to the barriers that we've identified. Because we believe this is one of the key ways that the assessment can seek to affect change. The recommendations will be included in the California Transportation Commission's annual report to the legislature, will also be issued directly to the legislature this December, as I mentioned. I also want to say that we expect the assessment to be carried and kind of lifted by our state government partners at the Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, our Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, Caltrans, and our industry and working group partners. It's ultimately been a consensus-driven document, so stand by the findings that we presented. One solution I would like to highlight, which we believe is critical in the next step forward to our transition, is to identify or create a central delivery team to oversee the next steps to our transition to zero. This network is, or this work in organizing our statewide transition, as I mentioned, 200, just folks who are directly interested in this. We have many millions who I'm sure are very interested in this, in creating cleaner air. It will require a focused group to organize the build-out, or at least strategize the build-out of that infrastructure to keep our momentum. Next slide. So really quickly, I just wanted to offer some context to our neighbors to our north. We believe this assessment can absolutely serve as an example for any states who may be starting to, or in draft form, planning their zero-emission infrastructure needs for medium and heavy. Particularly those who share key freight corridors with California. We've identified I-5 obviously as a key corridor for our states. I also want to highlight, and I won't get too much into it because Suzanne mentioned, our 3 states also had a joint nomination to the FHWA, seeking a funding request for 34 electric charging stations and 5 hydrogen refueling stations along our west coast. This application received a joint letter of support by our 3 governors, Newsom, Kotek, and Inslee, and as Suzanne mentioned, we expect to hear back later this fall. Okay, I just want to close by saying, again, I don't lead this work, I'm the Deputy Director of Programming, but my team is very expert in this field, and I'm very honored to present on their behalf today. One point I want to impart on, although you don't see it on this slide, is that our commission recently invested over $200 million in 7 infrastructure projects for heavy-duty and medium-duty projects this past summer through our Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. CALSA also invested roughly the same amount in our Portland Freight Infrastructure Program. We're poised to make more investments in the future, but we obviously have work to do. Thank you.
Bonnie's going to show us.
Yeah, I'm going to show a quick video.
Time for all your questions, so.
Okay, so, I wanted a break. I know I'm between a break, coffee and a break, and I want to quickly show a quick video because it's a 2-minute video, and it really just gives you a sense of what we're doing at the port, which I think is pretty groundbreaking. And I am the Director of Sustainability for the Long Beach Container Terminal. We're the largest terminal at the Port of Long Beach. And And, it's not, it's a full 2-minute one, are they? No. There it is, this one.
Okay.
And let me say, the port of Long Beach is, you know, you've got, the San Pedro ports, as Matt just said, I mean, 40% of the goods in this country come through those two ports, come through those, the Port of Los Angeles, POLA, and Port of Long Beach. And in addition, they have a CAP, a Clean Air Action Plan, that they put in place in 2005. And just this week, they made some announcements that they're
Diesel particulates are down 91%, nitrous oxide 63%, SOx 97%, while cargo has increased 36% during that same time. Yes, you know, for those of us who live there, I live in San Pedro. I work in Long Beach. I see the traffic that's completely stopped on both bridges frequently and all the way up the 710 corridor. And, you know, when I built a little house there, I made a nice light gray bamboo deck. And the first week I'm living there, I'm like sweeping outside. I'm like, what is this black soot? You know, and they're like, did you forget where you were living? And I've learned that, you know, I've just become very passionate about the importance of us moving quickly to remove this kind of impact on the local community. You've got communities like Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach, San Pedro, that are really suffering from this air quality. It's the most severe air quality in the state of California is in Bakersfield area, and number 2 is the San Pedro Port Complex. And it's because of number 1, the ships, number 2, the trucks, number 3, the cargo handling equipment at the terminals, number 4, the locomotives, the diesel locomotives, and number 5, the hub. So is this right?
Mhm.
Yeah, let's go. No sound.
First conceptualized in 2001 to create one of the
Go louder.
largest and greenest terminals of the world. By combining two terminals into one.
That's hard, that's about 100 years.
Today, it is
Not loud.
Long Beach is a terminal. Port of Long Beach is one of the world's most advanced shipping terminals with its zero-emission operation and state-of-the-art technology. Capable of handling 3.3 million TEUs annually, more than a double capacity of the 2 Asian terminals it replaced. LBCT is one of the
This is the AGV.
terminals in the United States, using clean electricity to power its entire operation. Today, the 4,200-foot-long wharf can welcome the largest container ships in the world. It's got emissions. All the ships plug into shore power electricity while on Earth. Then, using the only ship-to-shore cranes in the Americas capable of lifting 2 containers at the same time, the terminal can service 3 of the largest ships in the world at once. To quickly move the containers to the storage area, 102 automated guided transport vehicles, or AGVs, deliver them to the 30 automatic stacks, where the all-electric, fully automated stacking cranes load the containers onto trucks. This highly orchestrated zero-emission operation is not only green, but also highly efficient, offloading and loading ships in less time than any other terminals on the West Coast, with trucks moving in and out of the terminal with record speed. For cargo that will be delivered by a train, the Intermodal Rail Facility has 6 semi-automated rail cranes to load and unload trains on the largest hot rail facility in North America. All this using clean electricity to power these giant machines, making LBCT one of the most sustainable terminals in the world. The vision was clear from the start. Design and build a terminal like no other, a green terminal where the economy and environment thrive together, where green means productivity, jobs for our workforce, prosperity for the region, and protection of our air, water, and natural resources. The future is now, and
So, as you can see, when I first got there and they offered me this position and, I went,
How did you do this?
how did this happen in a union environment? How did this happen in, Long Beach? And they, started back in 2010, 2006, 2010. There was a 10-year environmental document. The very close collaboration and cooperation with all of the
Stakeholders. Joe was involved in a lot of that. He saw it from the outset, and we grew 3 times the size. So we hired a lot more people, and we made sure that we didn't let go of one job. We upskilled the workforce. We spent over $10 million training them and retraining them. So the same longshoremen, go to the next slide, the same longshoremen that, had typically been out in Ukraine in somewhat unsafe. We already talked yesterday about the difference between autonomous and automation and the human error that can occur. We've got the safest terminal as well in the country. We just won the Signal award for that. So really, this is who we are. I've already covered a lot of this. Let's keep going. Next slide. As you can see, here's, we were, as you see up on the top left, 2 small aging terminals with water in between. The port, spent $1.5 billion to put in all the infrastructure. We have a 66 kV dedicated substation. And I'll just share what we're about to do now. So next slide. This is all the equipment. There's 93 cranes that are on, they're all automated. The rail cranes, the stacking cranes. If you were to go to a traditional terminal, they're driving those around with top handlers, reach stackers, and here they're not. All of those digital cranes up in the top are moving on their own. Not moving on, they've got operators inside. So we have a very large operations center. Next slide. So again, these are some of the numbers actually at the terminal. Next slide. And clearly, our goal was when they brought me in, they said, okay, we are dedicated to being fully sustainable. And I said, does that mean not one piece of fossil fuel equipment on this terminal, including gasoline? And they said, well, do the math, do the plan, do the strategy, and let's see what that entails. And that's the first thing I did. And I have about 150 pages of like the greenhouse gas calculations. I went back to 2015. I thought that would be the best baseline year. And we have grown also from 700,000 TEU, that's 20-foot equivalent. That's the metric that you use in freight. That's like what used to be a small, like half-size container. Now they're 40 feet, so that's 2 TEU. We've gone from 700,000 to 3.3 million, and capable of 3.5 million. So that's a huge growth curve, as you can imagine. And we're really, our goal is to be the absolute cleanest in the world. Today, we are arguably the cleanest in the world. And you can go to Rotterdam or Hamburg or even a couple of the terminals in China, and you will see that they're all fully automated as well, except they do not have shore power. So thanks to CARB, and we've got some very aggressive air quality agencies in California, between the EPA controlling the mobile sources with CARB and the AQMD in the South Coast area. We are required to plug into shore power. And in fact, we were the only terminal this year that signed up for, they said you have the choice while they're struggling with some of the regulations to go with the 2007 rule, which would mean that the terminals aren't responsible for it, only the ships are, to do it within 3 hours departing and coming. And we opted to sign up for the 2020 rule, which puts us at equal responsibility for it. And it means you have 2 hours at the beginning when they show up to get them plugged in and off of diesel, and 1 hour at departure. So that was, so to date, we spent what the plan really, when I laid it out, I said, this is about a $200 million plan. If I was to add the parking for the workforce, which I have since done, it's about $225 million plan. So that was the first goal was like, okay, we can do this. We'll spend about 125 million on infrastructure, and 55 on equipment. Now, keep in mind that it's a big pill for a company, for an entity to digest, because you're about 6 times the amount of money for the equipment. And you all know that once you put the infrastructure in, you've got to put mini transformers, mini substations, conduits, chargers, and then the equipment itself, like a yard tractor that typically costs $100,000, costs $400,000. You know, and you're dealing with all the issues I was talking about yesterday. The tires will wear quicker with the heavier batteries, and you'll have a lot more challenges in some areas. I'm going to skip this, but this is, all right, wait, go back to that first one, that one. Just, not that one, that's the next one, right there. Thank you. I just want to say that the yard tractors, when I did the math, the 60-yard tractors represent 93% of our remaining diesel emissions. So I was really, I got on a, a track to go, we have to focus on these yard tractors first. We got to get them off. So next slide. Ocean, one of the things that most people are shocked about is that during the entire pandemic, you all saw on the TV, 106 ships lined up, backed up. We did not have one ship backed up. We took every single ship on schedule, and we took an additional 37, almost 40 off. So if this doesn't prove this model, I don't know what else does. It not only is a clean model, works for the economy and the environment, but it also shows that the productivity is there.
Do you have a challenge figuring, getting the power that you needed, the electricity to the site?
No, again, when the building was originally laid out, we had a 66 kV dedicated, we still have a dedicated substation. Today we use about 25 of those megawatts. By the time we're done with this plan, we'll probably use about 50. We've already had discussions. AQMD is wanting us to bring a 3 megawatt line to electrify locomotives. The port would like us to consider their broader rail master plan, whether that makes sense. But, we're of the mind of let's do all we can to help. So no, we're fine with power. And if you do work on SCE, the utilities, we keep saying they can't do it, they can't do it. I mean, they can't do it unless you give them a contract and say, let's go. They're not one of these things, because if they start building and those assets don't get used, they're stranded assets, and now they're on the ratepayers' bills, and that hits your urban, disadvantaged population. So SCE is standing there going, if you want to build more, just let us know.
Where does the power come from?
Southern California Edison. Oh yeah, what kind of power?
Generate it?
Yeah, so SCE right now is 43% clean, renewable. By 2030, they will be 80% renewable. And the majority of it's natural gas. So that's still fossil fuel. So we've worked that through with them we're pushing very hard. They're probably going to give us a special, like a green rate that we can pay more and and we're also looking at what do we need to do for renewables on site to make up that other 20%. By 2030, we will be scope 1 and 2 for net zero. We're already carbon neutral. Go to the next couple slides. So again, the trucks, go back to that for a moment. The trucks, they are thrilled about this. I can't tell you enough. Like, the trucks drive into our facility, they back into a stall. They have to get out of the truck, stand on a pad, a safety pad. Nothing moves unless they do that. A crane comes down, picks up their container, brings them another container, they drive out. You go to another traditional terminal, they're going to 4 or 5 places. They're in there for 2-3 hours, plus they're idling. So it's an entirely different experience for the trucks as well. And this is what, like you can see, there's no businesses that do this. I worked at Hewlett Packard for 13 years. I worked at Walmart. I worked at Mattel and a lot of other government agencies and companies. And you never see this kind of productivity increase with this kind of emissions reduction. Because usually it's like if I'm Starbucks and I'm going to grow, I'm going to have that many more stores, that many more coffee shops. So it's always a plateau, and they can tell you in absolute or relative terms, my emissions are going down, but they're really not. And so this is a powerful story. Next slide. But can't forget that what is also happening is our electricity use is going up, and that is absolutely important on what kind of electricity are we buying. And we're dedicated to the renewable mix. Next slide. So let me just mention something about funding. Again, when you have just an entity that says what makes most financial sense, we paid $100,000 for your tractors, and now you're asking us to pay $600,000 for them, and $2 million for a reach stacker or a top handler by the time you do all of and you're digging up our terminal and disrupting operations for how long? And so this conversation is going on, and I said, well, what if we were to, really look to the government as a partner? This entity was for 50 years owned by a Hong Kong family. During the Trump administration, that changed, and now it's owned by Macquarie Asset Management, which is one of the largest private equity entities in the world. And they are very dedicated to sustainability. They were the ones who said, bring someone in like me. And even when I showed up, my boss said to the whole C-suite and the board, like, if we're not serious about this, let's not bring this woman because she's going to hold our feet to the fire. And they're like, let's not hire her because, we have to be serious about this. And I had a lot of experience with government. I worked on, I started my career in the Boston Harbor cleanup, then I moved to San Francisco. I worked for every Caltrans district, high-speed rail, all the utility deregulations. And my first project was BART, Dublin Pleasanton Extension. And so I have a lot of experience in working with the government, working on grants, and I said, this seems like the right kind of partnership here. So we went after the Biden infrastructure bill. We got it was a $37 million ask, 20% cost share. We got that, so that $30 million will go immediately towards the 60-yard tractors. So we are handling already that. We're in the design phase of it. We're completing the obligation agreement with MARAD. And as you all know, there's some interesting challenges. We face things like the BABA, our Build America, Buy America. We moved all our manufacturing out. It's like, can we do this? We will do it, but it's a real challenge. And the cost-benefit analysis that is asked for doesn't make any sense because you don't get emissions reductions with infrastructure. So that CBA needs to change. The metrics on that need to change. We were able to do it with these 60-yard tractors, the emissions reduction, but as we've started to keep moving forward with the infrastructure, we just need to reconsider the fact that you don't see immediate emissions reductions with infrastructure. Next slide. We're also looking at induction charging for the trucks. They would drive up on pads. So we went after the CalSTA, the California State Transportation Agency, with the port. The port was awarded $331 million. And then the Port of LA was also awarded. And we asked for $45 million, and that was for the remainder of our cargo handling equipment. There's still some things out, and we got that money. So that's $36 million. So that was in the last year. We've also submitted to the next Biden infrastructure for all the infrastructure alone. And that was an $85 million ask. We stepped back and said, okay, if we would have one time dig up the whole terminal, what would it entail? So we don't do this 5 times. And it was an $85 million ask. We're waiting to hear on that. And then we just submitted to FHWA specifically to cover all the maintenance trucks and the buses. We have workforce buses that drive the workforce, the longshoremen all over the terminal, and those are old diesel buses. So it's getting in all the infrastructure for that, and we're waiting on that. So we're seriously pursuing all that we can. I do want to say the scopes, I'm not sure, I'm not going to get into an education for you all on scope 1, 2, and 3. I'm sure you know what that means. But we're doing some really unique things, just as our gentleman here from Washington was sharing. The carbon marketplace is a powerful marketplace, and it's one that we need to be seriously investing in, because when the dollars make sense, the money will go to the right things, you know? And so we are purchasing offsets, but we generate, because we've reduced emissions by so much, we've generated a lot of low carbon fuel standard credits, LCFS credits. Taken those credits, turned around and said, well, if Bakersfield is the worst place in the state, and we're contributing to that because the trucks are going to warehouses there, then let's go into the valley and find projects that we can help that region. And so we've invested in about 10 dairy management projects to remove the methane that generate electricity. And from that, we generate dollars and we reinvest those dollars in the AGVs and things. And then we identified what our scope 3 emissions are. And most people haven't done that. We actually said, okay, for the ships, trucks, and trains, the majority of our emissions, what is that? It's 27,000 metric tons, and we completely offset those as well. So when we invested, and I wanted to make sure we invested in something material to us, it was steel waste recovery. I said, look, we have a lot of steel here. Let's look at generating electricity from steel waste recovery. So let's be smart and make things relative and material to us, and not just, when I got there, they were buying refrigeration management in Canada. And I'm like, that's nice, but it's not related to our industry. So I think that's the last, so obviously resilience, we've got 5 LEED gold, LEED silver buildings, where we've got major solar arrays. I'm gonna look at putting solar on everything, from the shed to the top, the top of the roof of where the trucks come in and out. We're gonna put solar everywhere. We're also looking at distributed generation. We also will consider hydrogen. We will do everything. If it's like, from my perspective, it's like, this is a test site. If anybody's got any ideas, let's go for it. We have a big swath of land, and I said, should we put a bunch of wind turbines there? But it's been modeled, and there really isn't wind coming right through that channel. But the Port of Long Beach is going to be building a huge offshore wind right across from us. And so the port has been a really good partner and aggressive. And then just, there's a lot of controversy right now on CNG, LNG. The environmental groups, one in particular, has said that they're not in favor of it because of the potential methane. I personally feel like it's one of those, like, we're letting perfect be the enemy of good enough, because it could remove the diesel emissions immediately, and can't we do that for 7 years? But they're pretty non-negotiable about that, so we're pushing the ships to green methanol and having those conversations pretty regularly on the green corridors. And then I would just say, these are the, the challenges, making sure that we invest in the infrastructure first. I am not worried about the OEMs and the technology readiness. I am really not worried about it. Over in Europe, they've been running electric equipment for quite some time. This stuff is gonna work fine. Yes, we're gonna run into snags, but the marketplace will get there. We've already put the signals out, and, we've got 5 companies saying, we can do this. We'll get there for you. If you've got the money and you can obligate it, we'll make it happen. So I'm really not worried about that. And then just making sure we really involve the workforce, and really involve them. And as you all know, the negotiations just got completed only last week with the longshoremen. And it's really having that conversation. I was appreciative of both the presentation on autonomous yesterday, on like the importance of safety, but also putting that in perspective. And I think it's equally important. You all know that, like, every grant that's coming out says everything has to be human operated. And I just look at some of that and I go, I've been in technology for 20 plus years. And if we can use technology correctly and the tools it offers us, we truly can see a clean future. And so we've got to figure out how to have these conversations with one another and recognize that there's 1 million people that are affected by respiratory illness and asthma and COPD in the near vicinity. And, you know, how do we balance that out with the workforce? And make sure that they too, I mean, when you ask a lot of them, do you want your children to work here? They're like, no way. You know, I want to send my children to Harvard or somewhere else. And it's like, well, why? Because, you know, this is a hard industry. And so the safer we can make it and the cleaner we can make it, the better. I think that's, so that's it. I will end, and I think we'll all take questions.
Thank you. So at this point, thank you for all of this information. I think that's a lot for us to figure out where our points are going to come from. I'm going to open the floor for, let's say, 10 minutes for questions, maybe 15 if we have that. So.
Thank you, Bonnie. I really just want to give kudos to Port of Long Beach for paving the way with floating offshore wind. And it's really inspiring for Port Portland and in Oregon. I'm curious if there's any connection between what you were talking about with transmission and what Ali was talking about earlier with thinking about using our right-of-way to solve that challenge. And I love that Long Beach is already thinking about creating more renewable energy and making sure that it's manufactured in the US, but how do we actually get it into the grid?
We should clarify, what Bonnie's talking about is Port of Long Beach is going to build an enormous terminal to construct the offshore wind. And then they're going to move them up. Yeah, they're going to ship them out of Long Beach and move them up to Morro Bay. And they still don't have transmission from Morro Bay back to Southern California or anywhere. So it's still an issue.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that, you know, it's terminals and industries, the local industries around that if they can be incentivized, and I know that I was at the White House a few weeks ago and he said, you know, look, we recognize that even though this is $3 billion for the ports, or there's $1 trillion that, you know, is being disseminated, and all of us know who've worked in government for a long time, this is the most money we've ever seen flow into the system that is being managed. And yet it's a drop in the bucket compared to what has to be done. So there's no reason why these different entities can't negotiate with the utilities and go, okay, we can build a hydrogen plant here. We can do electrolysis and, you know, here with this distributed gen. We can put solar in as many places as we possibly can. I'm in agreement with Ali that it's like, we have to be intelligent about that. I'm watching us make the entire desert solar panels, and I'm like, is this the right thing to, you know, and so that brings up the hydrogen conversation. Everybody's running around going, we got hydrogen. I'm like, but it's not green, you know, it's black and gray, and therefore it's still fossil fuel. And so we have our work cut out for us, but I genuinely believe that if we're ready to start spending the dollars, the marketplace will get there for us. I really do believe that. I mean, we ourselves are going to, I said, okay, let's do this by 2030, but let's look at what self-sufficiency would look like. And we have old oil wells all around us. I'm like, let's figure out how to repurpose them. And I can't say enough about what Matt's doing. I mean, the 710 corridor is a mess, you know, and that really needs incredible attention. And, you know, so making sure that we align with what's happening on the corridors, and if we can add transmission in the corridors, I think it's great.
This is kind of for the Oregon team, and just following up on the RAID project and solar on right-of-ways. Where are we in looking at that? Is there an opportunity? I'm sure you've been in discussions. How might that fit into our planning for building up the grid?
Yeah, so as Ali mentioned, we had one of the first kind of solar highway projects in the nation, so we have some experience with that in a positive way. And I think that's, you know, triggered our partnership with the RAID to really look at our system potential. And as Ali mentioned, we have a report that's just come out that starts to look at a right-of-way, what opportunities do we have, what can that generate, what would the return on investment be. I think the challenge for us is the right-of-way is in high demand, from broadband to electricity generation to solar to a number of different sources coming from a number of different directions. So I think we need to start to, I'll look to Director Strickler here, I think we have to start to kind of evaluate how can we accommodate multiple things, what are our priorities in what locations, but it is certainly a potential that we're considering. And then looking at in coordination with, because not only are there federal regulations, as Ally mentioned, and some of those have been flexed, there's also some state laws and statutes that make some of these things hard, like putting EV charging stations within the right of way and not recuperating our costs or not charging the users. I mean, there's some challenges along with that, but it certainly offers potential, and it's something that we've at least gotten to the exploratory stage for, and I think now have to figure out what next steps will look like. I don't know, Director, if there's anything you want to add there.
Well, I think the only thing I would add, and I agree with it, is part of the process is getting to the point to where you can start to see the right of way function, right? And so you've got to accept what we've had as our historic norms and then start asking those questions. One small, and this is low hanging fruit, but I've long advocated for the fact that fiber and broadband should actually be considered a transportation connection, because not only do we use it, but it helps facilitate reduction in trips and all of those things, right? So there's the pandemic has really highlighted that benefit, and we were talking about it before then. I would say some of our federal partners are a little bit slower to come online and see that as a complementary benefit to the rider. So we're working on all of those things, and I think it takes the innovation and the conversation that we heard earlier to really drive, okay, are we going far enough in that thing? Amanda hit it spot on. There are a lot of demands for our right-of-way right now, and I actually think that's a great place to be. I see that more as opportunity.
Can they be co-located, solar and the lines and all that?
Yeah, I think in some cases, in one of the parts that I really enjoyed about the earlier presentation was just the design aspect of it. We've got to manage for glare, we've got to manage for other things, for safety and all of that, but see that it can be done. So I think that it can. Our pilot program that we put in place now, I think it was 15 years ago or something, is proving successful. So
And we did it as a pilot, but we haven't done anything since.
not on a large scale.
Additional questions?
I did want to end by saying on the 26th of this month, there are some FHWA and Caltrans folks coming to tour, and if other people would like to attend, that would be great. I'm talking to Doug as well about some point hosting this meeting there, and so that you can actually see it in operation. But please let us know if you're interested in tour.
Thank you. And one of the things I think would be really important would be a little bit of work on our part, but we'll get out everybody's contact information and slide presentations so that you can go back and look and ask additional questions as your mind starts thinking about this. I was just thinking about broadband and fiber optic up on 97 that, Google was doing and using the right of way, and it's like, there's an opportunity there, but now it's passed to trench something else. And again, it's thinking outside the box and trying to get people, when they're so narrowly focused on their own project, outside, like, what else could I include and who can I partner, and getting government agencies to talk to each other and to work together is so difficult, and it's so time consuming. I mean, everybody is, everybody's working hard, but it's just, there's got to be a better way.
It occurred to me that the other thing we could have done with the Highway 97 corridor is to require the revegetation.
What?
Require the revegetation with pollinating plants.
Right.
I mean, that we did, I didn't think about it.
Right.
So it's something that we thinking of.
And I just, I when I was sitting there, it's like, right away, I want that hydrogen plant, right away. Where can I put that? I started thinking about it. I mean, it makes you think outside the box and look at an opportunity. And so, thank you to all the presenters. Great information, and we'll probably be, sending you little questions as we go along. And I think that something else we should think about is sometimes, I know with our commission, we get presentations from our state offices and our different programs giving us this information, but we don't ever probably share across. So we don't make the opportunity available to Washington for their commission meetings or California, and it goes both ways. So if there's things that are that we think of as chairs that are pertinent to the other commission, we should be tapping each other and saying, hey, you might be interested in this presentation that your commission needs. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. I just keep adding more work for our staff, and they're all just going, oh, stop. Good. So at this point, we will take a break, and then we'll let Paula get set up for hers. Lunch, I think, is a little delayed. There was a little delay. So we may start presentation before the lunch comes. So thank you again, and take your break. There are snacks over there. I totally want to come see it.
Well.
I find out where.
Thinking Yes, they're right.
Caltrans.
That's why we have softball here.
Yeah.
I understand. Districts.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Come back to work. It is a lot. It is a lot. That's what I'm planning.
There you go. Yes.
Right? But I mean, what if we went to it? I don't.
Appreciate it.
For sure.
Why don't we start moving people like outside? And then we'll have it out.
Okay, reverse.
What do we do?
We're taking a picture.
Everybody?
Everybody.
Okay. We're heading out on the patio for pictures.
Staff and commissioners.
Up to the patio for pictures.
Gotta get a couple of snacks in. Finally went.
Okay, let me go ahead.
Oh, why not? Let's all go. Let's all go. Fun. Everybody's invited. Let me do a picture.
Can you send us a digital copy then?
Yeah, she's up there on the phone.
Okay.
Right?
Would you mind taking a picture on my phone of the group if you can fit us? Because I know we're doing it professionally. You're looking at this one.
Thinking like that. I'm just jealous.
Yeah, so I was number 2 for 3 years before I took
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Okay. I believe lunch isn't here yet, so Paula, would you like to go ahead and start talking to us about the West Coast Transportation Network?
I think Rena's gonna open it up.
Oh, yeah, well, come on up. If we can jump to slide 2, we can at least do a little quick intro. And Paul's going to walk you through kind of what the legislature has directed us to do. So this session, we had conversations with our legislature about this. And it's been something we've been noodling for several years. And it got legs this year, and the legislature said, well, go scope this and tell us if it's possible. But basically, they gave us $75,000 to carry an initial assessment and scoping effort to determine the feasibility and how we would do a West Coast, what they're calling a West Coast Transportation Network Plan. And the idea is that we would take the 3 states and leverage and align our efforts that we're all collectively doing around reducing our carbon footprint, improving passenger and freight rail, and of course, traffic up and down the West Coast corridor, and also taking a hard look at resiliency, which we heard a lot about this morning. And so this is an opportunity for the 3 states to really do something that hasn't exactly been done nationally, so it really could be an example for the nation of how states can come together and provide a long-term plan for these critical areas. So we are required to do a partnership with Oregon and California and the respective DOTs and commissions. So Paul's going to walk you through a little bit more detail. We have to have it done by December of 25. So we will be reaching out to your DOTs and of course commission staff and commissions to get further input as we roll this forward. Probably it'll start next year. And again, it is a scoping exercise that we're required to report back to our legislature on kind of inventorying what's out there. And so how would we approach creating a network plan like this with 3 states and get everybody to play ball? And how much would it potentially cost and how long would it take? So once we give them that information, I think part of the discussion we'll have with the other 2 states as we endeavor on this is how would we coordinate 3 states who have 3 legislatures, and how would we move this forward? And what are the opportunities for federal funding? We do think there are some promising federal grant programs that could very well pay for a multi-state effort like this. So we'll see. That's all going to be things we learn, but just to stress, this is the scoping part and not the actual drafting of a plan. So Paula, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks for a few minutes on the agenda to talk about this, and I hope you all have lots of questions and ideas and thoughts about how to formulate this. Next slide. So some very important considerations that form a foundation for this, I'll call it scoping study, because it's not the plan, it's just the scope, include border-to-border growth in population and transportation, as well as understanding the significant bottlenecks that slow all of our trade and increase our emissions. Major projects underway in each state. We all know what's going on in our own states, but having a broader understanding across the West Coast. Developments in aviation, electrification, and regional rail hubs and how they interplay and support one another. Getting an understanding of, as Rima mentioned, the climate risks and vulnerabilities. That was key from the legislative guidance. And how those threats and vulnerabilities threaten our power grid. And then opportunities for emerging technologies like those you heard about from Ali Kelly and other improvements that can support safety and efficiency. So those are some of the key foundational pieces for this work. And the legislator stated purpose and key features of a West Coast plan would include a long-term border-to-border coordination, considering the needs, as I mentioned, and investments of each state. So kind of going through broadly and looking at everything. Identification of opportunities to increase clean transportation and reduce our collective carbon footprint across the West Coast. We all, during this meeting, discussed that as a primary goal for all 3 states. identifying risks and vulnerabilities along the West Coast, and considering that significant portions of our transportation system are significantly vulnerable to natural disasters like earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, fires, and in Washington, we see many landslides. Just to name a few of the challenges that we should be talking about. So, Washington Transportation Commission has hired Cambridge Systematics for this project, and they have a good foundation up and down the West Coast and beyond. And that will get underway, I think Rima mentioned, it will begin in mid-2024 and run through December 2025. And that will be in connection with our state transportation plan. And our approach to completing the scoping effort will look at challenges and opportunities in 3 primary areas. Understanding how each of the 3 states evaluate system performance, recognize that each of our states and each of our commissions operate very differently. Policy constraints and opportunities, that's a broad category, and funding and collaboration, or how we can leverage funding for projects of multi-state interest up and down the West Coast. It's a powerful collaborative if we're able to come up with a scope and ultimately a plan. We could definitely leverage each other's needs. So as I mentioned, the scoping study will focus on establishing clean or cleaner transportation across the modes and building a more resilient system. And Cambridge Systematics will conduct virtual interviews, reaching out to Caltrans, the California Transportation Commission, CalSTA, ODOT, the OTC, and WashDOT, and Washington State Transportation Commission. And finally, hosting a workshop to share findings and discuss opportunities with you all. And as you open the meeting, the chairs all talked about the opportunities for collaboration. And I think I heard a quote I jotted down, and I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but it was, it's our interdependence that binds us. And I think that was a great quote for the importance of this study. And hopefully this spawns a lot of discussion. Rima, would you like to add anything to that?
That's great. If you guys have any thoughts or type or people we should work with at least to get this going, that would be helpful as we start to think about rolling this forward.
You have a comment? One of the things I think, we talked just briefly for a few minutes on break was talking about what's our next step. Here we are, 3 commissions. We've really enjoyed this time together, kind of energized us to start thinking outside the box a little bit and how we could really collaborate on some of these things. Then we're tying it up with this study that's going to take place. The question came to me was, do we want to meet again next year? Is California ready for us to? Because we know that staff, it takes time to put this all together. Do they want to wait? Do we want to tie it in with the workshop at the end of this study? Where I was just thinking about that. It's like, okay, we plan a workshop with 3 states to advance this discussion. Maybe we tie it in with the next time we meet and spend time doing that. And again, it's all about timing and how everyone around the table feels. We have so much, and I think some of the things, and I was just talking to one of our commissioners, Commissioner Byer, it's like, we're struggling to be able to keep operations and maintenance going. We are finding that the DOTs are at a deficit of being able to just keep up with the demand of what we need to do as a DOT. And then we look at these great opportunities coming up and how do we plan for the future? And is there any money left to do that planning? How much bonding do we have to do? I mean, there's just so many pieces to this. And then when you start talking about coordination and trying to leverage, it's like, how do we do all this? And we don't have the bandwidth. So I think that we have to get pretty focused at some point, and this may help us focus that point. I don't know. I'll stop because I'm sure you have ideas.
And maybe I can add a little bit from California perspective.
Doug's already nodded at me, he's my guy. We can be flexible on the time frame on how we deliver this. We're all going to work collectively together and having the meeting in a time frame that makes sense. I like the idea of coming back when this kind of assessment is done so that we can talk about what's in the assessment, what our teams are working on together, to try to chart out where next steps make sense, where next steps maybe don't make sense, and some of those road edges that we might need to conquer as we're moving through all of these different pieces. I think it'd be a good idea to reflect on what we've done today and say, how are we doing in implementing other things that we talked about as well. So we can be flexible as long as everybody is flexible.
Well, in terms of the timing of the study, as we work through, like I said, we probably won't get to this part until starting it'll be mid next year, just get underway. So if we want to come together towards the end of it and do this kind of wrap up workshop and kind of putting this bow on it, that we'll give to our legislature, but we also are hoping the other two states, even though your legislatures may not ask for it, you can give it to them and be like, hey, we did this cool thing with Washington and we all three want to do this and we have a way to fund it. There's federal money or whatever. We have a plan. That would be cool, and that would put us really more in 2025 in terms of being ready to have that final conversation, because next year they'll be gathering all the input from the individual states and kind of inventorying and assessing where everybody's at, what challenges they're facing. So next year would be tight to do that wrap up, and definitely by 25 we would be. And if you guys want to meet annually, that won't be a problem. If y'all are thinking you want to do, wait it, till 25, till the next meeting, then just maybe keep that in mind in terms of the schedule for this.
Say 25.
Yeah.
Are you thinking the first half of 25, the latter half of 25?
I mean, our legislature meets in the first half of the year every year. 25 will be a long session, so we'll be tied up in Olympia until probably about May, assuming they get it done on time. So I would assume, historically, these meetings have happened in September because it seems like a month that we're all kind of able to get together early fall. But that's not to say we can't do something different, but session may interfere with Washington's ability to connect in spring.
So this report is due in
End of 25 or January 26th.
January.
Yeah.
So one of the things is, there's a couple of things that entered my mind. One was if California wanted to move ahead and do something next year, maybe it's the kickoff, where we're talking about what we're trying to really focus on. And then in 25, when Washington goes, then we do this is what came of the study. I don't know. Yeah, that's just a thought that I had.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Fantastic.
It does seem like there's some value to being a mid,
Yeah.
very end,
Yeah.
kind of a conversation.
Well, I think that if we wait until 25, till September 25, that's a long period of time for us to all just kind of forget what we just all talked about. And if we're gonna work towards this and truly try to build this partnership together and have these meetings on a regular basis, I know for myself, I'm sure the staff are going that. Our staff are all holding their heads around the table in their minds going, it's a lot of work. But I think that it's important. I think the importance is we can't let so much time go in between. Even if it's like a mini virtual, I don't care.
That's a good point.
I know staff had been talking about maybe going and seeing high-speed rail. I know some of the other commissions have talked about that. That was kind of the general plan we had been working with. We're doing something next year in the Central Valley. Vince from FHWA, we know folks, the head of the high-speed rail board used to be the Secretary of Transportation, so we have those connections to do some of that. Our current chair, from the Fresno area, she's got a lot of connections there, so we could certainly go and see and do a lot of that, and that's kind of the assumption we were under. Obviously, this week, part of the problem with our turnout was also the last week of the legislative session, so we might move it a little further up, or later in September, so we don't run into that again. But yeah, that was the assumption we were under going into this one. Was we're thinking September next year, going down to the Central Valley. As far as travel, there's flights that land in SFO and skip over to Fresno, so it's not entirely difficult to get there. And Fresno's got a convention center and hotels, and they've got all that stuff right there. So there's plenty of opportunity, space to do this kind of a thing and be able to see some of that stuff.
That'd be great. I think that the one gap that you both looking at the high-speed rail, we're the problem in the middle. To make it work all the way.
We're an opportunity.
Opportunity is a good word, and there is none for the passenger rail, so, but, I think that that's the conversation we have to have. How will we make this work?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for what is on the agenda, right? Central Valley, key corridor and high-speed rail for California and getting to the finish line. There are a lot of other things going on in California as well around our state, and so we can have, kind of like we've had the last few days, a very robust agenda with multiple different topics that can be discussed that lead into kind of how we're thinking about what that next kind of reauthorization looks like. Even though we're in year 2 next year, we'll be in year 3. So we've got to start thinking about what are those things, what are those asks that we want to see going forward.
And I will make the comment as one of the old timers here. And Rima may remember this. Back in 2019 is when we said, we committed, we're going to do these every year, right?
We did, they were so excited. This is these every year.
And then
Yeah.
we for 3 years. That had been the intent coming out of that last meeting, was to try to do these. That's kind of the assumption we were under.
I also think it serves a function of energizing and bringing new ideas. We go back to our states and we're sort of mired in our O&M challenges and the various transportation crises that we're trying to solve from day to day. And it's wonderful to come forward and hear new ideas and be energized and get a little bit of an infusion to go back and take that to our various states. Sounds like everything that's
We're going to do next year. Okay, September timeframe, but I'll have Doug work with everyone around to find a time that works. It sounds like we want to bring an early kind of preview vetting session of the plan, what we want to do there. And then we can have our teams, like, you guys are an amazing team, work on the agenda.
And then Washington will host in 25. We're in our thoughts. We're noodling internally and our commissioners. It was just like last night, Paul had a great idea. I'm like, that's awesome. But anyway, we'll host in 25, and I love the idea of kind of having that wrap up in Washington. And I'd probably get some legislators there to kind of hear from the states directly a little bit. And by that point, I think there's an opportunity, and we're hoping that you guys in Oregon and California can use this to instigate conversations with your lawmakers and those that you can network with to get this line of thinking going. And I'm hopeful that we're going to find a really great federal funding opportunity. So when we go back to our legislatures, we can say, we want to do this great work and you don't need to appropriate anything. We can go get federal money together. That would be a really fabulous opportunity to really demonstrate, I think, for the country, the states can work together. In Washington State, we're looking at signing our next international airport. And it's not going well. 4 years into it, we have a new committee, but we're working on it, and there's questions around that proximity issue of the West. If you want to think of it a mega region, got Seattle, and they're looking at Olympia, and we're like, but there's the Portland airport, and then there's, it's like, how are we kind of got to get out of our border box and think more broadly when you think about air travel and high-speed rail and these things that really don't contemplate state borders. We need them to work seamlessly for the consumer and the public. So this is a real opportunity to start turning those silos down and, as Vince said, get out of our cylinders of excellence and getting one team together.
So, is our lunch?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. That's okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. You know what? We're flexible. We're in transportation, right? What I'd like to do this week is ask Terry if you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to share in closing remarks of how this went, what you think we should do in the future.
Well, just shared a little bit about one of the big values for me was to hear new ideas, things that we can take back that maybe we haven't thought of before. But also during our extended dinner last night. It was clear that there was a lot of rapport that was developed, but just by the level of energy in the room all evening. And maybe that's one of the most valuable things that came out of this was the relationship building that really ends up being the basis of a lot of innovation and a lot of moving forward. So I think that's one of the takeaways for me was how well that worked at this meeting and the advantages of that awareness.
We haven't really given an opportunity for our other commissioners to really speak to that too, and if any of you would like to chime in, and share what you think, or, you know, where you'd like to see this go. I'm pretty opinionated, and I've said a lot in the last couple of days. But, you know, this is a commission meeting, this is for us, and I believe you're right. I mean, one of the things, I think sometimes we forget that there's other people that have made that commitment to volunteer to do this job, and it's a tough one, and we forget that there's other people that are struggling as hard as we are trying to figure out the answer to it. So I'd like to see
This has been a wonderful opportunity. I've enjoyed getting to know my counterpart in the Oregon Commission. Last night we had a great conversation. Looking forward to working with him on the Bi-State Tolling Committee, and so that's one of the things for Washington side. When it comes to all three states, I think the idea of the transportation network, I supported it in 2019. I think this is definitely something that we look forward to. And I'm hoping that next year we'll see a few more California commissioners, because I'd like to get a chance to meet some of them. As I was telling her, I had such a great conversation with Bob Cavazos in 2019. It was a great man. I'm sorry to hear that he passed. So I think that's an important piece too, that we get to know each other personally and understand our lives and things and what's going on. So for me, that was another piece.
maybe we'll just go around the table. Would you like to?
Well, first of all, thank you again to the Oregon Commission and staff, and just to host such a wonderful and robust conversation. You know, what I took away from the last couple of days is that there's a lot of alignment of, you know, similarities in the issues that we're all working on in our respective states, and how we can collaborate more together. One issue in particular, and the word existential came up in the presentations as it relates to the RUC, is how, you know, how we're going to be able to, it's a political issue, right? How are we going to be able to reach to the public? You know, politics will be driven by the support of the public opinion, and how do we work together in terms of best practices, ideas, messaging, actually really PR, honestly, on this issue. And I think, you know, we can't look at this in a siloed way. I think we need to kind of help each other and finding, you know, ways to move this forward. On the network plan, I think that's really fascinating. One idea that just kind of came to mind as we try to engage legislators in our respective states is this organization, the Council of State Governments, CSG West.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, maybe somehow socializing this idea with them and seeing any traction there on potential federal funding. So I hope that we can continue to, you know, talk about new issues, but also, you know, there should be continuity on some of the topics that we talked about, because they're so important individually, and we should be working together as a network. So I love that word. But yes, thank you again, Chair, and to commissioners in Oregon. I wish we had more time to get to know each other, and look forward to next year, I guess, right? Next year? All right.
Next year, you have to sit at a different table.
Agree.
Me? Yeah. Well, I'm probably the newest commissioner in the room at 2 months in my seat, so I've been learning a lot for this particular meeting. but I have been a port commissioner for almost 18 years. And the synergy between transportation and ports is just amazing. That's particularly fascinating to listen to Long Beach. And particularly this last presentation that Paula did, I'm hoping there's an opportunity for ports to do a lot of private-public partnerships. And I haven't seen a lot of that here yet. And I think that if you have an opportunity to reach out and pull more of that into our presentations and our meetings, that might be a good way to get our message out to the general public, to find some real champions that are in the private sector. But again, I'm still fairly new, so I'm not entirely certain I know what I'm talking about. So I think I'm going to keep it short. You will most likely hear more from me next year.
Oh, thank you. I think I agree. As I've been listening to conversations throughout the room, and last night, everyone was just so appreciative of the fellowship that is created in these rooms, in these spaces and places and opportunities to share and learn about each other and our respective contributions. This network planning too, the thing I was thinking about is, as we were talking about, and Ali highlighted too, the West Coast is very unique in lots of ways. And, West Coast is the best coast is what I kept hearing in my mind of a very competitive person. And so, what is it that we can collectively strive to and work towards achieving cross borders, to your point? As we were talking at tables over the last couple nights, a lot of our goals are the same for our transportation system. Our deadlines may be slightly different, and we may be a little competitive with each other as states, like, oh, California did that, well, Washington will one up you on that one. We'll go with that. But collectively, again, I think we share a same vision for what our transportation system should look like. And so what is it that we can do collectively as states to A, model the way, to be a roadmap for creative and cooperative policymaking and visioning for the transportation system of the future, and how do we promote, market, share that with others so that they can think about that as well, because we really cannot do this in our silos. There are no borders. Our consumers don't see borders. They don't know when they cross into Oregon or California. It's all one system to them. And so I think I love the idea of, kind of workshopping some of the work that we're going to do with this network report, and maybe out of that can come some type of collective goal that we can all sort of buy into and incorporate into our planning and our thought processes as we move forward.
I agree with all the comments about the value of this meeting and continuing. I'm not going to reiterate them. I think that there is a huge opportunity for us if we can come up with a collective vision, the three states together. There's so much division in our country today. If we come up with, here is what these three states are committed to, towards, that will give us a huge voice. And it'll give us a voice with the public, it'll give us a voice with the federal government and maybe some money, and it'll give us a voice with our own legislators. So I think together we can be more effective than some.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'm one of the relatively new commissioners as well. It's been great getting to know many of you for the first time, but definitely the first time in 3D for all of you, and hear some of the lessons learned, best practices. It's very inspiring. It's also very motivating. I think to your point, there's a little bit of friendly competition, which can really help us when we go back to our legislators and say, California's investing, we don't want to be left behind, or Washington's already proven its use case, so there's a precedent at least. Take some of the risk out of it. We can really pool our resources in that way and leverage each other to make more progress where there's some misgivings about this very unknown technological advancement or whatever it might be. So I'm really grateful for that fuel for our arguments that are going to be really tough, especially thinking about some of these really challenging trade-offs we've all had to think about recently with reduction in our revenues and some of the very frightening forecasts that we've had. Thank you.
This is a wonderful opportunity to get to know people who across the West are working on the same issue. very valuable for me. And to hear what other people are doing from that perspective. And gain an appreciation for different structures, kind of look at the environment and say, oh, they're not doing it the same way. Or they are doing it the same way. It was impressive to me to understand that we're, at least on the two major issues, we're all working with the same thing, trying to figure out how to finance transportation into the future and how to address the climate issue, particularly electrification. Chris and I have talked a lot about it. I keep saying we either get ahead of the electrification game or they're going to blame, the public's going to blame us when they buy their car and can't drive it very far. I think that's really going to be something for us to grapple with as we get ahead. And we're discovering how interrelated all of that is. I'm trying to figure that out. I think this kind of discussion is helpful. That, and like most conferences, it's nice to get out and listen to other people and learn some new things. The presentations this morning were very interesting. It's exciting stuff that's going on. Well, not just the East Coast, but across the area. And I thought the presentation at Long Beach was fascinating. Really taking something in nature and saying, well, actually, you can do it. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned there. Working closer together makes a lot of sense. I think if we could figure out a way to get our political partners to work together, that'd be very helpful. And one of the things that always strikes me is that people take the roads for granted and often fond of saying that Oregon's economy, we're an export economy, and I say our economy rolls on wheels, and those wheels need something to roll on. And the three states are very tied together economically. We're probably more dependent on California than you are on us, but Washington. But I think it's really important to work together, recognize that.
I think I'd first like to comment on the road use charge because it was very encouraging to see so much shared concern about it. I think, beyond just a PR campaign, I think we need a whole strategic plan on how to move forward successfully on road user charge, because if we don't do it, I'm not sure anyone will. So if we could collectively do that, I would be thrilled. Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about Allie's presentation and what the RAE is doing, because I found that fascinating. And remember, I run a nonprofit organization dedicated to air quality and climate change issues. So that was right, square in my wheelhouse. Wonderful programs and projects and that they're doing. And I was a little disappointed we didn't have time to really get in and dig a little deeper on what she was presenting. And I know we were short on time to do that, but I would like to revisit that again, because I think there's a lot of win-wins involved in what they're doing, and I think that shared interest in doing that and helping by the fact that if you guys are doing things that we aren't, take that back, especially in California, our commitment to climate issues, and maybe get some good things done. And lastly, the network plan, I think that's a wonderful idea. I would say that I would like to see, I've got a bias toward important freight issues. I think that we don't focus enough on transportation on our ports and the freight and trucks, locomotives, and ships, and all of them. They're coming to all of our states and all of our communities, having huge impacts. And Bonnie showed us that you can do it right. There are leaders in the logistics industry, like Long Beach Container Terminal, who are doing it right, and that should be the standard that everyone else is meeting. But if only one terminal at the Port of Long Beach is doing it, it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the rest of the West Coast, if not everyone else is doing that standard. So when we do that sort of network planning, I'd like to see a focus on freight issues. And thank you, of course, for all those. This is absolutely.
Well, you're thanking me, but really we should be thanking the staff.
Yes.
And so I do want to point out Rima, Cara, make sure I have them ready. Tanisha, Laura, Douglas, Sabrina, she's out of the room. But you guys have been working on this for months. And driving this whole thing. Years?
3 years.
I've only heard about the last few months. But thank you very much, because without your work on this and really massaging, and I know there was other staff that were involved in it too, but you guys were the drivers behind making this happen. We really appreciate it. You know, we had the easy job of just showing up and participating. And all of the presenters, thank you for doing what you do and coming and sharing with us, because, you know, we're tasked with a huge responsibility as commissioners to make the right decision. And it's difficult because we are dangerous. In my own mind, at least I am, because I don't have the knowledge. And so I do have to really rely on staff to give us the information, the most up-to-date, you know, whatever it is, if it's a white paper or, you know, data that they've gleaned to make these decisions. And we're all just keeping our fingers crossed, at least I am, that I'm making the right decision. Because I think about the future of not only my children, but my grandchildren. Who knows if I'll have great-grandchildren, but not too soon. But, you know, I think about their future, because we're making decisions that will impact them. I have one foot on the banana peel, one foot in the grave. I know that my time on this earth will be gone way before a lot of this will ever happen. But I am thrilled to be part of thinking about the future. So, and I know you are too. So again, thank you for all you do and the hard work. Look at Rob, going to show up? Right now. Okay, so we're really close. So again, thank you. Any ending comments from the directors that?
I would just offer one, which is all the kind words. I think staff's done a great job pulling this together. This clearly shows value and benefit. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that all of us get paid, and all of you do not. And so, as it relates to your work, your dedication, your energy behind such an important issue for not just the West Coast, but the entire country, thank you for your dedication to public service. And thank you for your contribution to making the world a better place.
First of all, just double down on commending the team. I know you included me, but it was really my team that did a lot of the heavy lifting on this one, and I want to commend all of the teams from all of the states, because it really does take a village to pull off a meeting like this. I want to commend all of you for coming today and sitting with us through a lot of information, having really good questions and sending us back to think. And lastly, we're excited to host in California. We like a good party, so let's have some fun when we go there, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
I'll just say for Washington, being fortunate enough to have gone to all of these, I think Doug and I are the old wolves in the crowd. It's been really fun to watch it evolve and to watch new commissioners come into the mix. And there's always a consistency of care and concern and visionary thinking. And that's what makes the job really exciting, and I think that's why we all produce so well in our states and have a great opportunity. This is a unique thing. This is, according to my network of commission colleagues across the country, commissions are not doing this. So I think you're setting a really important example of why it's so important to collaborate for so many reasons. So thanks everybody for coming, and thanks again to Team Aleka that it took a village, right, to do this, and we'll keep working together to keep making it happen.
Perfect. So now the mom hat comes on. As we're getting ready to leave, lunch has arrived. So we're kind of on our timeline. Please leave your name badges at the door and any pins. Just name pins. Okay. And you might pick up any of your garbage and put it in the trash and take your name plates and drop them off. That'd be great. I will recycle them the next time. But thank you again. And the lunch is out there, and then the shuttles will be here on time, right? There it is. Shuttles will be here in 10 minutes and start shuttling people back. I do know some of you have to catch a plane, some of you are driving. Please be safe travels to you, and thank you again for coming.
So for the Oregon folks, we're supposed to stay here?
So the Oregon folks, you're supposed to go back if you need to change your clothes because you're gonna ride a bicycle.
That's why I wore this.
And there is gonna be a bus that will pick us up at the hotel, a lane transit bus, to go to the site. So,